Hey guys, welcome to the Stormkeep. My name is Mergonk, and I am joined by,
Hey guys, it's Paul.
Hey y'all, it's David.
and today we are talking about allies for Stormcast armies. Season 3 has seen a lot of interesting introductions for as far as ally options for Stormcast go, and I think pretty much all of the order books are out, and barring a couple of maybe Warcry warbands, we have a pretty comprehensive list of allies that are going to be available for us for the remainder of this edition. So today we're going to be talking about how viable some of these are and what you can do to spice up your list and as we move towards 4th edition.
Yeah, every army book is out for order. There's hopefully no surprises left. Well, I say that, but I would actually like some
Lumineth book.
surprises. Yeah,
Finally
another
getting Lumineth.
another Lumineth book. Let's go. All right, before we jump into the video, let's talk about our sponsor for the Stormkeep podcast, Kaiju Gaming Lounge. Located in Orlando, Florida, Kaiju Gaming Lounge is the official sponsor. They supply all the prizes for our painting contest. They also sell our merch. We have these fancy 9-inch, 7-inch range markers with our logo on there. Those are great for playing Annihilators in particular. So if you want to measure 9 inches or 7 inches off the table, you can do so with these handsome-looking colored rangefinders, or go for the clear option, which is also a good one. We also have dice coming back into stock. So if you're interested in picking up a set of Stormkeep dice, they should be available now. You can use Stormkeep to get 15% off all Warhammer at kaijugaminglounge.com. So today we're talking about allied units. I guess the big question is, why would we want to use allied units? Why wouldn't we just want more glorious Stormcast in our list? Well, allied units have unique stuff that's not available to Stormcast units. Despite being an incredibly deep army with over 70 war scrolls and unit options, Stormcast are quite limited tactically in what we can actually do. There's just hard limits on how fast we can go, how well we can cast. We do have some good things going for us, like how far away we can shoot from. We've got reserves, we've got teleports, but sometimes we're just lacking in bodies or just efficiency in some respect. Sometimes it's just a combination of things that are very useful, like maybe having a very cheap monster is a very useful thing to consider. Maybe just having lots and lots of bodies on a 10 wound screen is a very useful thing to have. And I guess the last big reason to use allies are that Cities of Sigmar units can score a battle tactic and a grand strategy in Stormcast armies. Now, I don't know how useful these things are, because the battle tactic in particular requires you to contest objectives wholly outside your territory. Or no, I think it's wholly inside your opponent's territory even. And that is just not possible on some battle plans in this season. Just straight up not possible. And the grand strategy requires keeping 2 Cities of Sigmar units alive at the end of the game, which means you're probably running a lot more than 2, because you don't want to risk losing your grand strategy because 1 unit was slain. So these are of questionable value, so we won't probably mention them very much, but it is something worth considering. The armies that Stormcast can bring allies from are the Cities of Sigmar, Fyreslayers, Idoneth Deepkin, Caradron Overlords, Lumineth Realm Lords, Seraphon, and Sylvaneth. So that's a lot of choices. That's a lot of armies that we can pick from. It's more than Stormcast can bring by themselves, so we have a deep roster to pick from. The only thing missing from this list is Daughters of Khaine. Are we still mad at Daughters of Khaine for ransacking that town and then doing all that nasty stuff? Is that the reason why we can't ally them?
Sigmar is definitely mad. He's
They've
definitely
patched
mad.
up since then, but I remember them being mad for like a little bit until Marathi was like, "Hey, I know I sort of messed up, but you're like taking this too personally. You should focus on like that Kragnos and like the stupid Gur nonsense that's happening."
So basically, we'll deal with the Daughters of Khaine later. That's where we're at.
Yeah, it's like it is a problem and we'll deal with them. Like it is a grudge, but it is not a grudge we need to deal with immediately. But as you know, Malarion says it in like a short story. He's like, Stormcast are now training against Daughters of Khaine sprites in that arena that he built for them.
Ooh, that'll be fun to see. All right, well, what are the rules for allied units? So there's a couple restrictions. First off, can't be the general. They do not count towards their minimum battle line. So if you bring something like Skinks, which have battle line all the time, they don't count towards the minimum battle line in your list. They do keep the battle line roll. So if you're trying to score something like Led into the Maelstrom that requires a battle line unit to charge and stay in combat, units like Skinks or Freeguard Steelhelms, which have battle line all the time, those still have that roll. Not terribly useful, but it's nice to know. They do, however, count towards the limits, the maximum limits on leaders, behemoth, and artillery. So you can't just bring 6 Ironweld great cannons. You can't bring extra monsters by bringing allies. None of that shenanigans works. There's also a maximum of 400 points that you could bring in a 2,000 point game. and maximum 1 in 4 units in your armies. You can't just have a list that is, 7 units and then 5 allies. It has to be mostly your army. And finally, they cannot benefit from allegiance abilities. And this is kind of a nebulous term, but basically it means none of your battle traits, enhancements, anything that comes with being your army, your allies cannot benefit from. And benefit means can't cast it, can't chant it, can't wear artifacts, can't use battle traits, can't use commands that are specific to your army, all of this stuff. Nothing really works.
Yeah, important thing to note is not even the universal enhancements work.
Yes.
So
yes.
you can't just be allying it for Levitate or Ghost Mist or anything.
Then let's look at coalition units, which are a type of ally, but not really. They're technically a different thing. So you could, for example, have coalition units and allied units in your army at the same time. All of the rules are basically the same, except there's no point limit on how many you can bring. So you could have a list that was 1,900 points of Cities of Sigmar and a 100-point Stormcast hero, if you wanted to, assuming you still had max 1 in 4 units in your army. So obviously that list won't work, but you know what I mean? There's no point limit. And they can benefit from allegiance. So you can teach them spells from the Universal Prayer, Universal Spell Lore, Universal Prayer Lore. All of that stuff is available, assuming they have the correct keywords. And for most armies that have coalition abilities, all of their enhancements are locked behind keywords. So Stormcast, all the spell lore requires a Stormcast Eternals hero, so you can't bring, let's say, a Battlemage and teach them Lightning Blast. You can't do that. But there's still some interesting combinations that make Stormkeeps worth considering. So we will focus on Cities of Sigmar first, because they have the biggest and shiniest and newest book, probably the most exciting one to talk about. And let's talk about the humble Battlemage, who's gone from S tier, fallen so far, so very, very far. But, Wild Form's gone, the +1 to cast and Gur is gone, Foz Protection is gone. I know, David, you're going to miss that one in particular.
Yep.
Yeah. Really? You like
Foz
Protection that much?
Oh, yeah.
Battlemage cares that hard.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's fair.
100-point wizard, -1 hit spell. Oh, it was great. But what does the Battlemage do now? Why are we even considering him? Well, he is still a 100-point wizard locus, and that is an important thing to have this season if you're just trying to fill out as many leader slots as possible to fill up Warlord battalions or the Acolytes battalion. He is a cheap one. He is a wizard. And then each Battlemage you bring can bring one of these effects, and some of them are hilariously bad, like giving him 2 bonus melee attacks. Okay. Sure. The ones that are important here are +1 casting, +6-inch range to all spells, and sometimes +1 to unbinding. I could see a very niche case for +1 to unbinding. But really, the reason you're taking the Battlemage is because he's a 100-point wizard that gets +1 to cast. So he's going to cast endless spells for you. He's going to cast Mystic Shield. If you're playing Stormkeep, maybe he can even do some Locust spells. Like he could be a +1 Blizzard caster, for example. The other use for him would be giving +6-inch range to spells, so you could get bonus range on things like Rupture if you want to reach out and touch a Kron Spine on the other side of the battlefield in round 1. If you want to add extra range to endless spells, send a Pendulum an extra 6 inches, send the Maelstrom an extra 6 inches. All of this stuff is pretty useful. The bonus range also makes it easier to cast things out of unbinding range for enemies. So, for example, you could cast a Horror Ghast from out of unbinding range, still get it deep in enemy lines, but there's no risk of it being unbound by the opponent, which right now unbinding is a hell of a thing to deal with, because everybody's got primal dice and they are super good at unbinding and dispelling. So being able to cast out of unbinding range, good for battle tactics, good for overall strategy, just a good thing to have. But Stormcast, of course, have the Lord Arcanum, which has a +6-inch movement on endless spells, which is probably better in a lot of situations than +6-inch range, because unless you can get it specifically hit that breakpoint out of unbinding range, then moving an extra 6 inches is better than having more range, because you'll move spells at least once, whereas you'll set up spells only once per cast. So if you ever have a chance where your opponent doesn't dispel or fails to dispel, then the bonus movement is better. The Lord Arcanum is also a Stormcast hero, so he activates holy commands. He can learn spells from the lore. He can take enhancements. He could be the general. This guy can't, obviously. Battlemage is fragile, super fragile. 5 wounds on a 6-up save. Like a stiff breeze will take this guy out. If you have a casting bonus, it doesn't apply to the unbinding bonus or dispelling, or vice versa. If you have the unbinding, it doesn't affect your casting bonus, which is really unfortunate. And he doesn't have a signature spell like every other wizard in the game, I think, has a spell on their War Scroll. He doesn't. He doesn't do anything except cast Mystic Shield and cast endless spells. And if you're in Stormkeep, he can learn a couple. So this is a lot worse than it used to be, obviously, but there's still a very small niche case where sometimes you just want a +1 cast or +6-inch range, and you only want to pay 100 points.
I could see that. Like, it's like a cheap way to populate a Endrinriggers and Acolytes. The +1 isn't that relevant because we have Primal Dice these days. But getting +6 on a key spell like Geminids or Aether Void Pendulum is actually pretty good. If you don't want to take 2 wizards, you can put him in an Endrinriggers and Acolyte battalion with like another hero and like a Knight Incanter, and then have a good, I don't know, like a 22-inch Geminids or like a 22-inch Pendulum, which is not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, it's niche. The best use I found for him is when you're playing like 2 units of long strikes and you want to cast Horrorghast out of unbinding range, because although you can do it, it's got a 32-inch threat range effectively. People will just pull models out of it and then no longer be in the range of the Horrorghast. So that extra 6-inch range, it happens, right? The extra 6-inch range helps there, and that's the best use I found for the Battlemage so far.
Yeah, I mean, nothing. Unfortunately, is gonna be like old Battlemage. I mean, the +1 to cast isn't bad. I mean, it's essentially +1 to Mystic Shield, which is Stormcast's best spell probably. So I can see a niche there. But yeah, it's really sad what he did to the Battlemage.
Yep, it's unfortunate. But hey, he lives on. At least he's not worthless. There's some value there. All right, let's switch things up and talk about what seems to be related to the Battlemage on Griffon. But I want to make a case for this guy that I think will be quite compelling. First off, he's nothing like the Battlemage on foot. Battlemage on foot is a cheap wizard you bring to cast a very specific spell every single turn. The Battlemage on Griffon is a 250-point flying wizard monster with 15 wounds on a 4-up save, which is, so far, he's starting to sound like a unit of Dracolines. Similar cost, similar movement, wizard, monster instead of not being a monster, same defensive profile. Melee damage is okay, right? It's like some combination of D3 on 3s, 12 on 4s, 3s, rend 1, 12 on 3s, 3s, rend 2. Gets bonus damage against monsters. One of his attacks gets exploding 6s on monsters. So this is starting to sound like a Dracoline type unit. Stick him on a flank. He can contest the flank on his own. Unlike the Dracolines, he can heroic recovery. He doesn't lose any damage until he's fully killed. He can Finest Hour. And his signature spell is not terrible, right? Ember Spear casts on a 6, so it's easy. Range 18, so good range. Draw a line, and each unit in that line on a 2-up takes D3, or 3 if it's a monster. So, yeah, for 250 points, this guy's actually worth considering using in a Stormcast list. Very surprising.
I don't know where I would use him, but I mean, sure, that is worse waste in our book to spend 250 points. When I see a 4-up save on stuff like this, I'm just like, does it have the utility enough to where, or like the damage to like where I would consider taking it? And like it being extremely niche against monsters is what worries me. I don't know, maybe in like a Comet Fall list, I could see it like as a way to get more and more wounds, but then we have more efficient ways of doing that as well. So I don't know. It's weird.
He's not bad for 250 points. Like, I kind of agree with you, Paul. Like, he could be something like a substitute for like Dracolines. Like, it's Dracolines are 240, Battlemage is 250. Like, it's not a bad swap.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you compare it to the Stormcast 250-point monster, the Toralon. This guy just mogs him all the way. It's crazy. But he's okay. Not a great inclusion by any means. I feel like C tier was too low for him. I feel like he's a little bit better than a C tier model usually would be in our army. But yeah, he's got some utility between hero and monster. He's kind of fills that niche of controls a flank on his own, independently acting. He's not the kind of monster that's going to sit in a castle and riposte or aggressively rush forward and kill things. He's more of a flanking type monster.
I will say Bravery 6 is annoying.
Oh, You just fail every heroic recovery. It's the worst. All right, let's talk about Alchemite Warforger, who was S tier until the latest round of nerfs to Cities of Sigmar, because they increased his points by a lot, going from 90 to 110 points. He is still a 110-point Wizard Locus. He's +1 to cast all the time, and you can stack that with a Star Drake to be +2 to cast, for example, if you really wanted a very reliable Mystic Shield. That's all he has going for him, unless you bring some other Cities Humans units. Then his spell is really good. It gives City Human units wholly within 12 inches of him hit 6 mortal wounds in addition. So when you have something like 20 Fusiliers, which is not that expensive, it's 340 points, plus 110 for this guy, all of a sudden, all of those hit rolls of 6 are dealing mortal wounds, and still wounding and rending normally. So that's, I think, the niche for this guy, is if you wanted to bring a block of Fusiliers, and then he sits there and buffs it up. I can't see any other use for him. He's got all the same problems as a battle mage. Yeah, I guess he's got +1 save, but that doesn't really matter on a 5-wound foot hero. That's not really relevant. If you want a +1 cast wizard, you can save 10 points and use a battle mage. I think that's the short version of it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the Fusilier package is worthwhile. So I guess we can just talk about the Fusilier package, because that's really going to determine this guy's value. So Fusiliers outside of Cities of Sigmar, I know everybody's going to complain about them in a Cities army. They've got the orders, they've got all the stuff that makes them good. But if you just bring them as an ally, they look a lot worse. So let's break it down here. For 170 points now, used to be 150, but now it's 170, you get 10 models, which is 10 wounds on a 4-up save. They are high volume attackers, right? 22 shots on Force Force Rend 1. You know, Force Force sucks. That's just really bad. But it's a lot of shots. It's like Crossbow Adjudicators levels of shots. It's Ideneth Reavers and Blissbarb Archers volume shooting. It's really, really high amounts of dice. And when you reinforce the unit, well, that's now 42 shots. And all of that could be getting hit 6 mortals from the Warforger. They are fortified at the start of the game, and until they move, they ignore rend from missile weapons. And once per battle, in rounds 3, 4, or 5, you can reroll hit rolls. And not just failed hit rolls. So if you have the hit 6 mortals, you can just fish for more mortal wounds by rerolling everything except 6s, if you were so inclined. So there's some reason to use these guys, right? But the problem is that they need that spell, or, you know, curse from a priest, which does functionally the same thing, in order to deal any kind of meaningful damage. Because wounding on 4s is awful, hitting on 4s is awful, even with all-out attack, which you probably don't want to all-out attack these guys. You know, I guess a Toralon could give them +1 hit, but that really doesn't feel very efficient. Their damage is just not good unless you have that other effect, which none of them are guaranteed, right? You need a spell to go off or a curse prayer. The fixed 24-inch threat range is really easy to play around, because every time these guys move, they lose -1 attack and -12-inch range. So it's like playing against Cruel Boys and their shooting guys. What are they called? The Bolt Boys? Yeah, it's either 12-inch range or 24-inch range, and nothing else. So very easy to play around that fixed threat range. They're slow, even when they do need to move. Only 5 inches doesn't really give them a lot of board control presence. Yeah, I think the short version is you should just use Crossbow Adjudicators instead. They're similar volume, higher accuracy, drop into play, battle line, only 20 points more. I can't see this package being efficient enough to want to use it in Stormcast armies.
Yep.
Yeah, they're balanced around their orders, honestly. That's why. I mean, I'm disappointed, because why even have like a coalition in our book? But I guess our book wasn't written with this in mind. But they're balanced around their own allegiance abilities. There's no point in taking these guys really.
Yeah, and that's probably a good thing. You don't want a really efficient shooting unit that can just ally into any army and just be good. Like even like Crossbow Adjudicators, we really like them, but they're only good because you can drop them into play and teleport them around, and maybe Thunderbolt volley with them sometimes. Like that's why we use them, is because they have all that stuff. If you strip all that stuff off, if it's just the War Scroll, well, that's not very exciting.
Yeah. I agree.
All right, let's talk about the Hurricanum, because it was going to be stupid, but thankfully they eroded it before the book was officially released.
But you didn't want to take like 4 to 6 D3 mortals every turn and there's nothing you could do about it?
Oh,
that didn't sound appealing.
No, No, it didn't at all. So the way, let's talk about Storm of Shemtek. Let's talk about what it currently does. In your hero phase, you can pick an enemy unit within 18 inches. You roll a number of dice equal to the round. So on round 1, you roll 1 dice. Round 2, you roll 2 dice, and so on and so on. And for each 2+, it's D3 mortals. So very, very random, and it starts very slow. Usually the game is determined by round 3 is kind of like the pivotal turn where games are usually decided. So things that get stronger as the game goes on tend to be really, really bad in this game. But this had a stipulation where it didn't say in your hero phase, it said in the hero phase. So in your opponent's turn, you got to just blast things for mortal wounds. And although it started slow, if you brought 4 of these things, you could just...
Or even 2 of these things.
Even just 2,
yeah. Like if I could do 2d3 to you, 4d3 to you in a single battle round, I count that as a victory.
Yeah, and then so I was even thinking of lists where you would play Living City and you would just deep strike 4 of them in, and then as soon as the next turn starts, you just blast everything with mortal wounds, and then it doesn't matter who wins the next turn, you just blast it again with mortal wounds.
Yep, my plan was 2 of these things and 2 Celestial Hurricanum, so you could have a crisscross going,
Oh, the Luminarchs, you mean? Yeah, I like the Luminarchs too.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Luminarch of Hysh and Celestial, which we'll talk about, but yeah.
Yeah, so that was what the Hurricanum did. They nerfed it, so now it's just your hero phase, which is honestly a lot better. It would have had to cost so many more points the other way, and that just wasn't fun to play with. So it's also 12 wounds, 4 up save. It is a behemoth for all reasons that matter. You can also pay 30 points more, and you can add a hero wizard on top, who gets to cast Chain Lightning, which is a better version of the Stormcast Chain Lightning for some reason, which is very annoying. One enemy unit takes...
the storm, maybe. It's the humans.
Yeah. The humans that watch the storm, they're better at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, instead of 4+1 mortal wound, it's 4+ D3 mortal wounds. Yeah, that spell's okay. That's not the reason you bring this thing. It's for the Storm of Shemtek. Everything else is just gravy. It also gives city humans units +1 hit. So if for some reason you're playing a Stormkeep list and you bring more cities human units, you can get a free +1 hit. Free, only 230 points. Yeah, in Stormcast armies, I think it just takes too many turns to start dealing reliable damage, and it's not worth going Stormkeep to bring multiples of this thing. They're too fragile. They'll just get picked apart. Their max damage is also just not very good, and without the ability to teleport them or deep strike them with Living City, their threat range is very limited and very easy to play around, because hero phase damage is it's very useful, but it's also the most predictable form of damage because it happens before movement. So very easy to stay more than 18 inches out, even if you do bring a bunch of these things. Yeah, it does get through Lookout Sir, which is worth noting here. That's a cool thing. But it's just not enough. I don't think I'd use it. I'm saying it's D tier. I don't know how many points it would have to be for me to consider it in Stormcast armies, and I think that's fine. I don't really... it's fine if allies aren't worth considering, right?
Honestly, I think it's... Now that they've quote-unquote fixed it, I think it could go down just for cities, too. I think some of their behemoths and, there's some odd things in that army that are, way overcosted, and I think it's primarily because of the Warforger, because they have to considering what happens if this thing has, a +1 to save all the time.
Yeah,
the Hydra being more expensive than the Kharibdyss for some reason. What?
Yeah, just random things like that. Why is the Celestial Hurricanum with Battlemage that expensive? It's a good unit. I don't think it's that good. But
260 does seem like a lot for a 1-spell wizard without a bonus to cast.
Yeah, and it's doing 1, maybe 2d3 mortal wounds if you let it live. Extremely weak to shooting. Any range, 12 wounds on a 4-out. It's a cauldron. It's a bad cauldron.
Yeah, and bad bravery, so it can't heal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not great. It could probably go down, but anything that does ranged mortal wounds should be very precariously balanced. Can't ever get too cheap.
Yep.
Speaking of spamming mortal wounds, let's talk about something that probably should have been eroded: the Pontifex Zenestra. So, have you guys had the pleasure of being across the table from Pontifex Zenestra yet?
I never won a Night Relictor more until I played her.
Yep, the Night Relictor is getting value here, especially because seems like every Order army will be allying her shortly.
Yep. I think that's the issue. Is like I feel like whenever I play against, I only had like a little bit of games against the new cities, but like I think my biggest problem with cities has been I feel forced taking units that I originally wouldn't like. Feel like they're half takes. Like I have to take this kind of unit, so that makes sense.
Like a must-have, yeah.
Like I must have. Like yeah, I hate playing games where I feel like I'm like, wow, I really must have this now in like a tournament or something. I'd rather just be able just to be more tack.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about what she does so that we can complain about her justly. Her big thing is that she is a priest, and her prayer gives one of 3 different effects. Either you get a 5-up ward bubble around her, or cities humans everywhere just get +2 move, or every enemy wizard and priest takes D3 mortal wounds on a 2-up, with no range or line of sight required. It's just the whole table, every priest and every wizard takes D3 mortal wounds. And okay, that's scary, but she can pick 2 of these effects if she is not within your territory when you chant this. And the way it's written, it doesn't say 2 different effects. So you could pick the wizard killer twice every single turn. All you have to do is chant that prayer, which, prayers can't be stopped aside from the Knight Relictor, stopping them on a 4+, but that pretty much just murders every priest and wizard starting in round 2. You run her out of your territory right away, and then every turn until she dies, she's just blasting everything on the table for D3 mortal wounds. And that's not wizard and priest hero, so if you've got like Lumineth, like you just lose. Sorry.
Start taking bravery checks.
Yeah. And then at the start of the combat phase, and then whenever she fights, so if she's the only thing charging, you activate her. She can do this twice, basically, immediately. Another 2-up D3 mortal wounds to all enemies within 3 inches. So she is just a mortal wound spitter. And she's also pretty tough to deal with because she's 9 wounds and a hero, so she can benefit from Lookout Sir. And even though she's, riding on a chair being carried by 2 guys, that doesn't count as a mount. Those are just companions. So she does benefit from Lookout Sir. And she has a 4-up ward, so you have to deal effectively 18 wounds to her. But she's protected by Lookout Sir, and a 4-up ward makes her quite healthy against mortal wounds. She's a +1 unbind priest, which is cool. Yeah, there's just a lot going for this War Scroll for only 170 points. Now, in a Stormcast army, 170 is quite a lot, right? Like, we like having stuff at 100 points. That's our cheap threshold. 150 is like, this is like a chariot, or it's like a more expensive kind of cheap unit. And then 200 plus is our hammers. This 170 is a little weird. It basically means you're taking out a screen and then, endless spells, or you're reducing hammers in some way. So it's an awkward number to deal with. She is super slow, 5-inch move, which means if you want to get her wholly out of your territory to blast stuff, that could be battle plan dependent, right? Sometimes your territories are huge and you can't get wholly out of your territory because there's terrain or enemies and something in the way. Her melee damage, aside from the mortal wound blasting, is just not good. And her use in general, aside from just blasting things with mortal wounds, like if you're playing against Caradron, which don't have wizards and priests, she is a very expensive screen and nothing else. And she's random, right? You need to roll a 3+ to chant, and then a 2+ to do the mortal wounds each time, and then it's D3 mortal wounds. So there's a high amount of variance, but all of that is so reliable that it kind of doesn't matter that there's a high variance, right? Like, it'll happen. You have to assume it's going to happen. Your opponent will play around it happening. And the last downside, is as many as you can find, is that she is unique. So even if you take her in a Stormkeep army where you would normally be able to get enhancements on Priest, you could learn Curse. She can't because she is unique. And unique units cannot take prayers from that lore. There aren't many unique priests, so it's cool that we're seeing more of them. Overall, in a Stormcast army, I think we can take advantage of this effect. If you put her in a Cometfall type list where you're already trying to kill heroes and wizards, she's just going to help blast them all down. She could maybe score that battle tactic if she's being aggressive and moving forwards. If she dies, well, that's damage that's not going into your hammers, so that's not the end of the world, right? I think we can leverage her pretty well. But I think her value drops off a cliff as soon as they errata her to require picking 2 different effects, which I'm quite certain that they will do that, because it's stupid playing against this model. It's just so awful.
Yeah, I mean, Tzeentch just, you just kill all their mortal heroes, and then they're like, cool, I can't summon, and I'm host of summoning. Feels so good.
Yeah,
She moved.
this is like the Order Kronspine, I think. It's really stupid.
Yeah.
So
She makes spellcasting savant a little bit harder too. Like, oh, you're gonna go leave your wizard in the corner. Doesn't matter. 2d3 mortals until you die.
every turn, and
Every
can't interact with her. Yeah, it's pretty silly. Pretty dang silly. Maybe they need to add a range onto that. Maybe that would solve it. Who knows? If they do errata her, I think she drops down to D tier. I think she becomes too expensive for what she does, and probably better off just using a Night Vexillor at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another one. Freeguild Command Corps.
Oh boy.
Yeah, this is another stupid unit from Cities that somehow dodged an errata. There's two stupid things about this War Scroll. The first one is the Sawbones, the Doctor model in this unit. It can revive D3 wounds or revive D3 wounds worth of models from a Cities human unit, which includes itself. It is a Cities human unit, so every turn it can revive itself D3. However, it does this 3 times per phase, and it doesn't have to be different units. So if this is the only Cities human unit, it just revives itself 3d3. Minimum 1 model comes back, sometimes 3. Every single turn. And it's 18 wounds on a 4-up save, so it's not fragile by any means. It's not like super easy to kill. It takes significant damage to get through this. And as long as it's alive, it's also doing Dispatch Spies, which is one of the dumbest abilities they've ever made.
It's a board-wide Geminids on a 4-up.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So it's... okay, if you guys played against Olander, she's got this thing where if you try to issue a command within 12 inches, she just says no on a 5-up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that requires being within 12 inches and rolling a 5. And it's only around Olander, who has a small base size. Dispatch Spies is everywhere on the battlefield all the time. No range or line of sight required. You still use the command point. So, like, if you're issuing a holy command once per game, that ability gets burned on a 4-up. The command point's lost, and you can't use the ability again. Even sometimes something as simple as denying a charge reroll. Like, if your opponent fails a charge, that could lose them the game. And then if you deny them the ability to re-roll that charge, that's tremendous, right? Sometimes you deny Catacross with his super powerful command ability to give his whole army +1 save.
Jeez, I didn't even think of that. Oh my god, dude.
There's just always incredible value to get out of this unit. Even if all you do is once per game deny all-out defense, that's worth it because of how good the rest of the War Scroll is too. Denying Inspiring Presence, denying Rally against Daughters of Khaine and Fire Slayers. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Then also, it's a totem, so it's issuing commands from 18 inches away, which can be helpful. There's sometimes units that can't issue commands to themselves, like Stegodons or Chariots or things like that. This unit, for some reason, is also +1 run and charge all the time, and it adds D3 inches when it retreats. And just in case you thought you were going to kill it and have it run away to Battle Shock, nope. On a 4-up, they ignore Battle Shock. Cool. So it's a super durable screen that is super wide, 6 model wide, that heals and revives itself for D3 every single turn, 3D3 every turn, and until it's dead, it will be denying commands on a 4+. So it either sits in front as a screen.
It's not bad at combat. I don't know if you've seen the combat profile.
It's not terrible, yeah.
For a screen, it's actually like it's not bad at all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's almost no downsides, right? It's 170, which is that awkward value, but oh man, it feels way better paying 170 for this unit because it's replacing a screen in your army. And it can just sit on the side of a table edge and score battle tactics while denying command abilities. It's so stupid. Overall ranking in a Stormcast army, this is S tier. I think if you want to be a competitive Stormcast player, you should very strongly consider getting one of these for your army. Maybe 2? That's probably going too far, but...
No. 2 in a Cities army. I think 1 in a Stormcast. You just don't have the points, but yeah, you should look towards getting one of these in, because it's actually insane how useful they are.
Yeah. Now, we're predicting some errata here, right? We are predicting that Sawbones has to pick different units, because that would be more consistent with other revive abilities in the game that can't be stacked on a single unit like this. They nerf the OBR revive stacking, so I'm suggesting that they're probably going to nerf this. I also think Dispatch Spies is either going to be a 6-up if it's table wide, or it's going to have some range requirement on it, because table wide, no line of sight, and a 4-up, all of these things combined is just, it's just not fun.
I can see them making it like 18 or 12 inches to be more in line with how those abilities are in other armies.
Yeah. So if these nerfs go through, I think at that point it's not worth using anymore. It's specifically this combination of a screen that revives itself, like a tough screen too. It's not trivial. It's 18 wounds. That's like 2 units of Liberators, right? Almost. And yeah, that combination of denying commands and reviving, it's good. It's very, very good.
And when you're shooting this unit, you're not shooting the 30 guns that are behind it.
Or more accurately, 6 long strikes, but yeah.
Yeah. For us, at least, it'd be the 6 long strikes, Tempesters, anything that you should be shooting at or you should be attacking. Like, okay, you're just hitting a screen now.
Yeah, screens with utility are really good.
Yeah,
like Vanguard Hunters are very good this season because they're not just a screen; they have utility. It's like playing Magic and you get land that actually has effects instead of just basic land. That's what these guys feel like. All right, putting the brakes on the crazy train for a bit here. Let's talk about the Wildercorps Hunters. So they are quite a lot worse than all the other units we talked about for the last little bit. 140 points for 11 models, of which I think 4 of them have to be dogs, which are not good. They're just like basic melee combatants on 4s and 4s, rend 1. There's a couple shooting guys in here, not a lot really. Yeah. Their main gimmick is that after deployment they make a normal move, and that's a really useful thing to have because it gets you on objectives right away, especially if you're forcing your opponent to go first and they're trying to just get a minimum required unit allocation to get max score. Like they just want to put 1 model on each objective and then that's the end of their turn. Well, this can force them to put more stuff on objectives because you are putting models on objectives. You're contesting at least 1 or 2. Now it's really hard for them to contest more. They have to go out of their way to either kill this unit, and that requires positioning or shooting in some way. So it's like, it doesn't seem like it's good, but it does force your opponent to react in some way. It's also really useful to do a normal move after deployment if you know you're going to be facing like some very specific threat ranges from things that teleport or deep strike away from you. Like if you're playing against a Seraphon list that wants to teleport Croak forwards and then kill everything within 18 inches of Croak, having these guys move 5 inches forward is just more space that you're denying and limiting where Croak can teleport. So I don't know how useful...
Or KO for that matter.
Or like KO, yeah. Or Stormcast or, Soulblight want to revive a certain distance away from you. So there's a lot of considerations in how useful that is. The other thing that these guys do is that, like Hunters of Huanshi from Seraphon, they are not visible to enemies while the attacker is more than 12 inches away. No, they don't have the cover thing like the Hunters do. So yeah, if they're a screen that can't be shot by long range shooting. So if you're trying to rely on a tactic which Stormcast love to do, which is shoot with long strikes from across the table and then charge in with like Annihilators or Draculines or something, that tactic doesn't work because these guys just aren't visible. So little bit of utility there. If you put them in cover, they get a bonus to rend to boost their shooting, which is okay. That's not the reason you bring them. The reasons you bring them are for the positioning utility and the screen that can't be shot. Is any of that worth using in a Stormcast army right now? I don't think so. I think there's better choices for that exact spot.
It's hard because it's 140 points too. 30 more. You either go 30 points above that and get command score, or you just take off 40 points and just get yourself Liberators.
Or you take off 60 and you get Hunters of Huanshi.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a weird. It's got niche use, so we're calling it C tier. It could have some situational purpose.
I will say when the Great Cannon got released, I was wondering, this was pre-points that we knew was 150. I was thinking about how it could possibly slot in for us in a Stormcast army, just because we have the Lord Ordinator, so he could just really help these Great Cannons hit better and stuff like that. But for 150, I do agree it does compete with the Ballista. I think that's what really kills it for me is that it's not only slow, I'm also paying 150 points. I feel like if the Great Cannon was cheaper than our Ballista, like 120, like around that range. Maybe you could see like a niche list of like, I want to run like 2 great cannons or something with or more with a Lord Ordinator and then just go to town. Like I could see that being a problem, but for 150, like we start hitting a range where like we could do better things with 150 points.
Yeah, I was thinking about using him. I think my main problem with him is like it's just too static. Like because it does lose its 24-inch range as it starts to, try and shoot.
Yeah.
If you move it without the City of Sigmar orders working in its favor.
Yeah.
So my issue with it is like, so you're paying for like a fixed gun turret that is sometimes a 16-inch shooter or a 24-inch shooter. And I already know from experience by fighting a lot of Cool Boys players that having fixed threat ranges where you can't move like that, not being able to move is like a huge detriment. And for that reason, even with a Lord Ordinator, like I would maybe consider it if it dropped down to 130. Because right now it doesn't even seem like Cities of Sigmar players are taking it because they would much rather just take more Fusiliers or like a Celestial Hurricanum or like a Steam Tank.
Yeah.
So maybe 130 would make me consider it. Maybe drop it to like maybe bring it up to like B or C tier. But right now, I would just use a Gunhauler because that thing's like fast. It can turbo boost itself. It's got a good shooting profile. It's got a 3-up save, 10 wounds, I believe, 10 or 12, and so it's like a fairly tanky machine. And it can also be buffed by an Ordinator. So I would definitely consider Gunhaulers before this one.
The cannon's also got some issues with consistency. Right, it's got a huge variance on its damage. Like it's got D3s and D6s all over the place. Forced to hit, which is awful. Low volume of attack, so a couple bad dice rolls and the whole thing just goes away. The Rend 4 shot is super tempting. Like you see Rend 4 on a war scroll, you're like, "Ooh, okay, that sure is something." But then you roll up 1 on damage, and you're like, "Oh, okay, cool."
I do like Rend 4 as a way of, saying screw you to Kragnos. But it is nice to have in that. But then, yeah, I don't know. Like it feels like every artillery they've designed so far has been underwhelming except for Iron Blasters, who are still like the most insane artillery piece I've ever seen. It's like their long strikes wrapped alongside a great cannon for some reason.
And they come with a monster carrying them that can do charge mortal wounds.
They have a good melee profile. Like that guy can bash people. So it's like every artillery piece since then has been like meh.
Yeah. Artillery in general, slow moving stuff isn't great in this game. Like movement wins games. Really the only reason to do damage is to score battle tactics and get things off objectives or stop them from hitting you so that you can move. Like movement is how you win Age of Sigmar. Every inch of the board matters, and when something has a fixed threat range, it's like one of the worst things you can have for a shooting unit. The Steam Tank, on the other hand, fixes a lot of these problems because it's like a cannon, but it's 12 wounds on a 2-up save, and it moves, and it can run and shoot, or it can get 50% more shooting, like if you don't need to move that far. And you can also add a hero on top for 40 points, and he adds more shooting and more melee, and then he can copy commands to another Steam Tank, so if you bring 2 Steam Tanks, buff both of them with 1 guy. If you make it a hero, he can also Finest Hour, so everything now wounds on 2s, because Finest Hour works on mounts. And he's also a 1+ save at that point, which just gets silly. Yeah. He also does charge mortal wounds, right? Like 2-up D3 charge mortals to 1 enemy. That's cool. Yeah. Like this is a good unit, surprisingly, for 230 points. It's 270 if you add the hero, which it's a bit on the pricey side. But it's not terrible. Super high variance, right? I don't like all the D6s and D3s I'm seeing. The 4-ups to hit, could live without those, but honestly, not terrible. A lot more useful than the cannon because it can move. It can move and shoot. What a concept.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it's got a pretty wide base too. It can you can use this. You can turn it sideways, and it does a bit of screening pretty well.
I think the 230 point price tag is what kind of helps me too, because then now your brain goes, okay, is this worth swapping a Longstrike unit or a Dracolane unit? Mm-hmm. I do like how it kind of does slot in easily for our hammers at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that 200 to 240 price point is like, oh, I can easily wrap my head around replacing a unit of 2 Fulminators with this thing instead. So yeah, I think it's okay. I think we're dangerously close to seeing some kind of Lord Ordinator build with a bunch of steam tanks and gun haulers in a Stormkeep. I think that's coming. Hopefully that's coming, because that would be awesome. Doesn't contest objectives worth a damn, but hey, can't have it all.
It could. You don't know. You don't know.
Just 2 models each.
Yeah. Just kill everything. Just roll your 4s. And if you're good at rolling 4s, you don't need to worry about it.
Just roll your 4s and 6s, and you're good. All right, let's talk about the Sorceress, looking at the elf side of Cities of Sigmar now. She is a 100-point Wizard Locust that can sacrifice a nearby Darkling Coven model to get +2 to casting. So that could be like one of the cheap battle line units, one of the Dread Spears, something like that. It could also be a Blackguard, which is very useful because the Blackguard gives her a 4-up ward, so that's a natural combo. +2 casting for 100 points. Assuming you bring another at least 90-point unit, usually 140-point unit, that starts to feel a lot less useful because the Blackguard on their own are not a good unit. You need the Cities of Sigmar stuff to make them worthwhile. And yeah, so I think most of the time she'll be a pass. But, and this is a fun but, she can sacrifice herself. And if she's bonded to a Kronspine, which you can do if you're running Stormkeep, you can bring her as Coalition and then the Kronspine as an ally. Then she immediately dies. Kronspine immediately goes wild, and now you have a wild Kronspine with no dice roll required. So that's a fun little niche, and that's a combo we talked about before on the channel, but it never really got popular. But having a wild Kronspine guaranteed at the top of round 1, that's pretty cool, man. That is pretty cool. Not a lot of armies can do that.
There's still people at GW who really feel wild Kronspines are bad. I don't know who those people are, but they're convinced wild Kronspines are bad when they're actually really, really good.
Yeah, they've been thinking this for like a solid year, and like they've just now realized, oh wait, no, people do want their Kronspines to go wild.
Yeah, that's super fun if you have like really low cast value spells that have long threat ranges. Things like Horror Gas, you can easily cast out of Unbinding range, still affect the board, push it up pretty far and then eat it with the Kronspine, and now it's rank 3. If you can, Thunderbolt Volley or Comet Fall or something to kill their enemy's Savant so they don't have Rupture, you're really cooking. That's not something that's trivial to deal with. A level 3 Kronspine tying down your army is a really touchy thing to deal with. It's very hard. It takes a lot of pieces. You have to pay an extra 100 points to make it wild. At that point, you're paying 580 points for a Kronspine, and you have to go Stormkeep for it. So no reserves, which is a bummer. So it's an expensive combo, both in terms of points and opportunity cost, but hey, not many armies can do that, so that's cool. Not going to bother talking about the Blackguard. They're not very interesting, but we could talk about the Drakespawn Knights here. So in the last book, the Drakespawn Knights actually started seeing play in a Stormcast army because they were a 120-point screen, 10 wounds, 3-up save, 10-inch move, so they were comparable to Liberators. Instead of being Redeemers, they hit decently hard, they were fast, and yeah. They still have that niche, right? They're +1 run in charge always. Pretty much the same unit they were before, but they're more expensive.
I thought they were actually 110 last book.
Oh yeah, they were. They got super cheap. They got really, really cheap.
Yeah, I think that's why I was like, they were so cheap, and it's 10 wounds, 3+ save for 110 points. That moved really fast. So Liberators were doing that job now, but
yeah, they're
like at the time, like having a 10-inch move, 3+ save screen, it was really, really nice.
It was, yeah. It got to the point where you'd like swap out your Liberators for Fulminators and then bring these guys as the screens. So you still had the basic combination of Hammer and Anvil, but you're just using very efficient units. And it worked reasonably well, especially with how the battle plans were in previous seasons. These guys were able to score the battle tactic. It wasn't a bad idea. You can still do that. You're just paying a lot more now, and I don't think it's worth it. Like 140 is not the price point for these guys to be used in Stormcast. They have to go down to like 110. And I don't think they'd ever go down to 110 because their damage is actually reasonable. It's not good, but it's okay. Lots of attacks, mount attacks. If you can put a curse on a target or something, these guys will actually be a threat.
Yeah. They were great while it lasted.
Yeah. I certainly hope they don't become good because I don't want to be tempted to buy these models. Let's talk about the noble Kharibdyss. A true order monster through and through. Nothing says order like that face right there, whichever face you want to pick. Why are we talking about the Kharibdyss? Why is he B tier? Well, because he is a 160 point monster that moves 8 inches, and enemies within 12 inches cannot rally or Inspiring Presence. And that's it. His melee damage is like irrelevant when he does anything in melee. That's cool. Bravery 10 for some reason. Okay, sure. He's a 160 point monster that stops Inspiring Presence and rally. That's all you need. He's Ionis without any of the prayers, without any of the dragon stuff. He doesn't fly. He's slower, but he's only 160 points. And that's a really, really useful thing to have.
If you're running a 2 chariot list, you can just swap 1-for-1 chariot for this guy.
Yeah, usually. Right. 10 points more. But
10 points more now.
Yeah, the utility to be able to smash to rubble terrain is really useful in a lot of matchups. Being able to roar is always useful. There's never a bad time to roar. And sending this thing up forward counts as 5 models on an objective, denies Inspiring Presence. All of your long strike shooting could go in there and they can't inspire. And then it dies horribly, but that's okay because it was only 160 points. That's like losing a chariot. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I think the price tag is just really, really nice for Stormcast armies. Like, paying a chariot price to shut off your enemy's rally and Inspiring Presence is really massive. Like, imagine if our chariots could just do that, right? Like if they had like some weird special ability like Shock and Awe, they did the same thing. Like, we would all take one.
Yep. Yeah, they would be quite good. A chariot that roars and stops Inspiring Presence. Whew.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about something completely different. Gyrocopters. They are 80 points, 12-inch flying move. They either have a 2d6 3 no rend shot or a 3d3 rend 1 shot. 4 wounds on a 3-up save. 4 wounds is an interesting number because it means they survive D3 mortal wounds every time, and there's a lot of D3 mortal wounds in the game. So that's nice to know that you will never lose one to a D3 mortal. And once per battle after moving, 2-up D3 mortals to something. Cool. It is an 80-point single unit that flies around, scores battle tactics. Yeah, that's all it does. But that's all it needs to do. Because that's a really useful thing to have this season. Because it's just a matter of point allocation. It's like, do you want to spend 400 points scoring battle tactics, or do you want to spend 200 points scoring battle tactics? Well, if you use less points of your army doing battle tactics, that means more points can be spent winning the game, like strategically. And they're cheap enough that you might even want to consider running 2, stick them in the corners of the battlefield, and then score the grand strategy to have 2 cities units alive. Like, this is one unit I would honestly consider just for that purpose. 160 points to pretty much guarantee a grand strategy.
Yeah. Especially with our grand strategies, like, anything to make it easier helps out a lot.
Yeah. The current crop of grand strategies are so bad, so it's actually worth considering. Their damage is not terrible, honestly. Like, you could bring these guys in a squad of 3, that's 240 points. You're looking at about 6 damage per model, which is what long strikes do. And more wounds, faster. They're like short-range long strikes at that point. I don't think I'd use them for that purpose. I like just being a cheap speed bump that your opponent has to deal with. But they're not terrible either, so I don't think they're getting any cheaper.
I do want to say that when this first came out, I really believe that you got both those profiles for 80 points.
Nope, one or the other.
Like, why is nobody running 14 of these? What? Like,
I made a list that has 14 of these.
I don't know if I want to buy anything that can get retired in like a blink of an eye, cities.
Yep.
I mean, you'll have them for like 2 more years at least, so that's good. But we know there's a second wave coming, I think, sometime like in the next 2 years.
Yeah, there should be. All right, let's move out of Cities of Sigmar, finally. It's only been like an hour. It was a big book, okay? It took time, but we're past it now. First up, in Kharadron Overlords, let's talk about the Aetheric Navigator. So what does he do? Why are we even talking about him? Well, he's a cheap hero, 100 points, so he fills those Warlord battalions very well. He is a Dispel in your turn, an Unbind in the enemy turn, and Unbinds this season are just great in general. And in your hero phase, you roll 6 dice, and for each 1 that you pick, you can pick an enemy unit within 30 inches. They take D3 mortals, and they have half movement. So Rolling 6 dice, you're just looking for 1, 1. On average, you will get that. So this is an expected result. Sometimes you get more, sometimes you get none, and that sucks. But just blasting something for D3 mortal wounds from 30 inches away and halving its movement is an incredibly powerful effect. Like, that is so stupidly strong. I love that.
I have been experimenting with the Navigator, with the Karazai list, only because if you can really... Sometimes the best defense is just not getting hit. So if you run into matchups where, your opponent might have put a lot of points into like a bigger block of units, for example, like 4 Morgeists or 4 Fulminators or anything that's like, it's obviously it's a hammer and it usually is a pretty expensive hammer. Just rolling a lucky 1 and making that hammer just not be able to do anything for a turn is really, really big. And it's only 100 points, and you get a Dispel. Like, the Navigator really isn't that bad of a pick, depending on the Stormcast list you are running.
Yeah. Now, the downsides, he's slow. 4-inch move is even slower than Stormcast. He's fragile, 5 wounds on a 3-up save. And Dispelling in your turn is probably the worst time to Dispel, because Dispelling in the enemy turn means they can't recast it in the same turn, and that's the best time to Dispel. So it kind of sucks. But I guess if you just look at it as a bonus, like... Okay, sure, why not? Yeah, he's okay. I could actually see us experimenting with him. Not just in Karazai lists, but in like shootcast kind of lists, just where you're trying to limit how many hammers can reach you. He could see play.
I will note that I feel like KO are probably going to get another rounds of nerfs. He might go up a little bit more than 100 points. But for 100 points,
they're not going to hit him. They can hit Thunderers and, I don't know, maybe like the Chemist.
Hey, Balloon Boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's talk about them. They're basically the same unit, the Endrinriggers and the Skywardens. Both of them are a 12-inch flying move, 3 models for, some 120 or 130 points. They have some combination of shooting and melee, and it's usually pretty good, like 3s rend 2 in melee with the saws, or 3s rend 2 shooting with the riggers, for example. If you bring 6 of them for 240 points, they can fight reinforced now, which is awesome. Like, that's actually a good melee profile. Like, an average of 26 damage on 3s rend 2. That's not great for Stormcast standards, but given that it's attached to a flying 12-inch move that can also teleport once per game if they trade off one of their weapons, that's cool. But they're like prosecutors, 2 wounds a model on a 4-up save. Yikes. Yeah, that's not good enough. And the Skywardens are and the Skywardens are like the same thing, right? A little bit less shooting, a little bit more melee, a little bit more accuracy. They get better in melee, like they go up to 38 damage if they're fighting reinforced, which is, that's actually seriously good damage. Editor's note should be rend 1, not rend 2. So are they worth using in Stormcast? I don't think so, especially if they get nerfed, which we think they will, because Caradron's just a little bit too efficient right now, and their win rate's a little too high, and this seems like a likely candidate to get nerfed, because otherwise people will just default to spamming these guys if Thunderers get nerfed and these guys don't. So I'm not going to go out and buy a bunch of them. I'll say that much.
Pretty much.
The Gunhauler, on the other hand, could certainly be worth using. Even though Stormcast have a plethora of options at around 150 points, there's not quite anything in the game like a Gunhauler. For 170 points, you get a 12-inch flying move that can go 18 inches once per game, and it does pass over mortal wounds every single turn. You roll 4 dice, and each 4-up's a mortal wound. It's got good shooting, approximately 12 damage on 3s rend 1, or you can trade some of that damage for a 24-inch shot, so you're almost never not shooting with this thing, even if you can't get within the 12-inch range to do the most damage. You're still hitting something, and it's going to be pretty good. It's also not fragile. It's like a Liberator, 10 wounds, 3-up save, except it doesn't lose any board presence or damage until it's fully slain, which is great. We like to think of it as a flying chariot with guns, and that is a good thing to have, because it can just hold an objective and continue shooting with its 24-inch shot. Downsides, it's 10 wounds. It can't benefit from cover because it's 10 wounds, and it's not elite, so it can't issue commands to itself. Most of these things don't matter, the way everybody uses this guy as an ally, these are not really huge downsides. It's just it's worth noting, I guess. What do you guys think of the Gunhauler this season? Would you consider using one?
Maybe in a shoe cast. I think cities kind of ruins the Gunhauler because you know what's also 170 points?
The command core. Yeah.
So I think honestly, if you just like, if you have a chariot, if you're running a chariot and you have 20 extra points, a Gunhauler is not bad. You know, like you trade 2 wounds for a gun.
Yeah, and charge mortals. Charge mortals are nice.
And charge mortals. So I mean, it's not bad.
Yeah, certainly worth using. Armies besides Stormcast certainly get a lot more value out of it. Like Fire Slayers love bringing these guys.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
I played these in Fire Slayers. They're amazing there. I don't know about Stormcast because we already have good shooting and positioning. In Fire Slayers, they're amazing because it gives you a quick objective grabber, gives you a good screen, gives you like a good hero assassinator because it also has bombs, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, the Passover models are good. Similar kind of unit, the Akhelian Allopex. This is a very fast unit, 14-inch flying move. It is a mix of a shark and a cannon strapped to its back for only 150 points on a tremendous threat range. The shooting on the harpoon is 24 inches. After moving 14 is just ridiculous threat range. So it can sit in the back and pepper things, and then when it needs to, dive into combat like a Tempester would. Awesome, right? It's 43 damage on 3/3 round 1, so it's not the best shooting in the game, but it's also not terrible. Like it's enough that it's a threat. And when it dives into melee, it's doing a max of 12 damage, potentially 2 more if there's a damaged enemy. So yeah, it's another one of these. It's a chariot, but with guns. It also has the added utility of, instead of taking the harpoon launcher, you can take the net launcher, which it's one shot that does 3 damage. But if it hits, the target can't make a pile-in move that turn. And that works also on Unleash Hell. So if you get charged in by a big horde unit, you Unleash Hell with these guys, and on a 4-up to hit, they can't pile in that turn. Probably not worth the command points, honestly, because it's so random. But that is really cool utility that at some point we'll probably see play. These guys are currently 150 points. That's probably not going to stay because Idoneth players are spamming them. They're running lists that have lots and lots and lots of sharks, so they've gotten too cheap and they're probably going to get nerfed. But even if these guys were 170, same as a Gunhauler, I think I'd still consider using them sometimes in Stormcast armies.
I think the thing is they got 2 directional buffs where the points on these came down and they unlocked the Shiver in a proper way.
Yeah.
And it honestly, like, either one was fine. Like, I think these guys would be fine at 160. But yeah, 150 feels too cheap. But I'm constantly seeing like 12 shark lists now.
Yeah, they're just annoying to deal with.
I mean, it's basically like somebody said, like, previously when I remember when these came out and Stormdrake Guard were 340, that people, because these were 170, people were like, oh, why would you take this over 2 Stormdrake Guard? Because this is like, this was also 342 for the 2 of them. But they're getting to that point where they're too efficient because these guys have gone down to 300 for 16 wounds and a 4-up save, plus the tides and all that, stuff you're getting.
Yeah. Good unit. Certainly consider using it. Namarti Thralls. Okay, so I wanted to try making a case for these guys because they're a super high volume melee attacker, right? Baseline, it's 21 damage on 3/3 rend 1 for 110 points. That's like Vanquishers fighting the best case scenario. But then they get bonuses. If they're fighting something with 1 wound, they get a 50% damage increase. They go up to 31 damage. And then if they're fighting something with 3 or more wounds, they double damage. They go up to 42 damage. So there's usually a scenario where these guys are hitting way above their point cost. And if you reinforce them, it doubles. So if you reinforce this unit, because it has 2-inch range, you can fight in 2 ranks. You can deal up to 82 damage in 1 turn. 3/3 rend 1. That is an insane amount of output for a 220-point unit. You can also support them if you bring things like a Thrallmaster to give them exploding hit 6, or -1 to wound, or a soul render to revive a bunch of them. I don't think you need to do any of that. If you just look at these guys as like, it's 110 points for a screen, and that screen can just do a lot of damage in the right circumstance. and that's like, imagine if your Liberators could just flip a switch and kill stuff. And that's a very interesting piece of utility, because damage is utility in this game. So I don't think it's currently there for Stormcast. I can't see a list where I'd actually want to do that, but man, is it tempting. I think what kills it is that there's a lot of stuff in the game with 2 wounds, right? There's a lot of cavalry with 2 wounds. There's a lot of screen and chaff with 2 wounds, and these guys are just okay against that. They're also just
a lot
slow,
of the top
fragile.
Yeah. Currently all 2 wounds, basically, I think. For the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not particularly durable. If you're using a screen, you want it to be a 4-up or even a 3-up with Liberators. You want it to survive light shooting, and these guys just don't. So it is very much like a paper-thin screen, and I don't think we have room right now for that kind of thing.
Yeah, if Liberators were 110, I could see some argument for these guys, but Liberators being 100, knocks them out of the question for me.
Yeah, being battle line and call for aid, and yeah. But man,
and then not being beacon, so you don't get the ward, you don't get the has to shoot closest unit, you don't get any of the stuff that keeps these guys alive. You're just there.
It's just crazy to me that these things have gone down to 110. Like the damage output on this unit. This doesn't even require buffs. Like, this isn't like Witch Elves where they have to bring a whole bunch of stuff to buff them and stack all these things. This is just the unit. Like, it's crazy how much damage they do.
Everyone's so high on sharks that like Thralls were just like I don't know why people just punted them to the side. I don't get it.
People are sleeping on them, man. This is like an MSU spam type unit at this cost. You can bring so many of these things, and even if your opponent kills like 2 or 3, you've still got 2 or 3 more, and you're doing just fine. Let's talk Lumineth Realm Lords. Starting out with a pretty fun pick here. Used to be more fun before the season started, but this is the Scinari Loreseeker. If you've never seen this guy on the table, I am envious. He is such a pain to play against. And let's talk about why. So he is a 1-spell wizard, so he's only casting 1 spell per turn. But once per game, he can just guarantee a cast. Deep Thinkers allows you to automatically cast a spell on a 9, which can now be modified further. So if you wanted to add a primal dice to that, you can do that. What makes him really good, though, is he deploys outside your territory before the first hero phase begins, and more than 3 inches from all enemies. So that means you can automatically deploy him outside of 3 inches of an enemy, and then you auto-cast a big endless spell like a Purple Sun or Geminids or Pendulum or something like that. So that's really cool, but there's more. If he's deployed on an empty objective, so if there's nothing contesting that objective, he counts as 10 models on that objective for the rest of the game. Usually until he dies horribly the next turn, but it's still enough that your opponent can't just walk 5 models onto that objective. Like we were talking about with the Wildercorps Hunters, you can just like have positional gameplay, force your opponent to do more things than they'd want to do on their turn, and that exposes them to danger from a Stormcast army in particular. He's also got decent damage output. Like, it's always surprising when this guy takes 2 to 4 wounds off in a turn, and +1 to save if there's no friendly units within 9. So if he's out there on by himself, he's the 3+ save. You can also Finest Hour, all out defense. He can get reasonably durable, but not really. He's still going to die. He's only 6 wounds. So he's got a lot going for him, but 160 points is a lot to ask. And if you're not controlling who goes first in round 1, you put this guy out there. Your opponent takes first turn, kills him. You've lost 160 points. That sucks. You could say, well, my opponent's gone first, so now I can potentially double turn him. Yeah, but you'd also rather just have 160 points. There's other ways to play around a double turn,
Yeah.
So at that cost, he's really hard. He was a lot easier to swallow before Primal Dice became a thing, because when you were auto-casting a Purple Sun, and there was like no chance your opponent would unbind it or dispel it the next turn, and it would just stick around for a while, and you get multiple turns of value of instantly killing stuff and rending it, that was awesome. But now that Primal Dice make it really easy to unbind and dispel, this whole thing falls apart. It's just too easy to counter, too expensive to pull off. But still, like, there's a lot of utility in this guy, so I think he still could see play. If only we could teach him Blizzard like Lumineth players do. That would be the business.
He's not bad. The problem is, like, if you have 2 primal dice and your opponent also has 2 primal dice, because typically, unless you're taking the battalion, you're always going to have the same number of primal dice. 9 is actually a pretty good cast to add primal dice to, because you cannot miscast, basically.
Yeah.
So it actually helps. So like if you get a 4 or 5, and that's now you have a 14, that's not a trivial thing to unbind. They will have to commit all of their primal dice to try and unbind that one spell.
Yeah, but which spell is it going to be? Is it going to be a Purple Sun for, what, 80 points now?
No, I would probably deploy a Pendulum or Geminids with them.
Yeah. But each of those have problems, right? Like Geminids don't do anything on their own. They require follow-up damage. They can fail. You have to roll a 2+. Easy to dispel.
Mm.
Yeah, I think this guy could be cheaper for Lumineth armies as well, but I'm very worried as soon as they make him cheaper, people are going to start bringing like 2 or 3, and it's just going to be just hell to play against it. It's so awful when people have aggressive magic armies like that, especially when it's like there's going to be a list that drops 2 Loreseekers.
He can't be cheaper. Yeah,
I know.
It's just he's too threatening for that. I think
Yeah.
also, like, people already hate fighting against Seraphon. Do we really need 3 Loreseekers in our face turn 1? Because Lumineth has good spells too. Like, they don't need endless spells necessarily. They can just cast some of their Vanari spells at you.
Yeah. So, hopefully after Primal Dice are gone, he could be played again, but that's probably not going to happen until the new edition. So, this is the state of affairs we're in. Let's talk about Ellania and Ellathor, a cinematic model that they really tried to push as like a painting centerpiece, and I don't think it succeeded for them on a different topic. This model's not as popular as I think they thought it would be. But the War Scroll, let's talk about that. There are 2 spell Wizard Locusts, so they can go inside the... oh, no, they can't, because they are unique, so they can't go in the battalion. Fun. They're fairly durable for a foot wizard. They're 8 wounds on a 3-up save, and they can give themselves a 5-up ward. They are +1 to cast, unbind, and dispel all the time, and that's one of their better features. A 2-spell wizard that's always +1 is pretty cool. If they're within 3 inches of your general at the start of your turn, you get on a 4-up, you get a CP. Neat. Then they have these weird mechanics. So like this is the stuff I've mentioned. That's what I consider when I look at this unit, right? Everything else I'm about to talk about is like I don't even evaluate this because it's so janky and random. So they get more powerful as the battle round goes on. So they've got like a mortal wound shooting attack that they can do once per game. Hits everything in a line. It does mortal wounds equal to the round. So like round 2, it's 2 mortals. Round 3, it's 3 mortals, and so on. It just takes too long to get that off, you know? And then they've got an okay melee attack where the sword does damage equal to the round. So damage 1, and then damage 2, and then damage 3, and so on. But it's only 4 attacks. So it's like, but for the time it takes to get good, it has to be round 3, 4, 5. And that's just too long in the game. You could just take something that's cheaper, that's having an impact on every single round of the game. And then after fighting, you have to roll a dice. And if you roll less than the current round or less than the wounds taken, then this unit heals D6 and it has to teleport more than 12 inches from all enemies. And there's going to be times where you just can't be more than 12 from all enemies and you just die. You also don't want to force a teleport. There's a lot of times you want to stay in combat. But the fact that you have to roll and it's just random if you get to teleport away, and then the healing gun is random. Yeah, there's just a lot of nonsense associated with this War Scroll. But like I said, I don't consider any of that when I evaluate this unit. The way I look at this unit is it is a 2-spell wizard that's +1 all the time, and it gives you a CP on a 4-up. And if you just look at that for 190 points, that's not very good.
I mean, it's all right. Like so most wizards can't fight. This one can actually fight. It comes with a spell that protects itself. And like, yeah, you're right. Like, I don't, it's not always that I'm gonna like that auto teleport itself crap, but sometimes it's good because it's like it allows me to get into these weird, funky positions. Like if obviously I don't know if I take this in a Stormcast list, but it's like I don't know if I would, but it's like in a Firestars list, yeah, I would take this because it lets me get the magical domination. It unlocks 2 unbinds for me. It allows me to fight with a hero that it lets me get like one of those battle tactics that wants me to charge with a hero because this thing's like it moves fast because it's an elf. It gets me command points, and if it's forced to teleport, I can put something like Farsters don't have like a lot of like weird movement, so I can like put it behind their lines and start threatening their foot heroes because their damage hurt. Because the longer they live, if I get a double turn and it's now round 3, okay, now I'm doing a lot more damage. So I can actually threaten a decent bit of their front line.
Most of the time, I'd rather just bring a single wizard. Like, if you look at this as like a value proposition of 2-foot wizards, but cheaper, and both of them get +1 to cast, that's a good value proposition, right? But the problem, if you're spending one of those spells to give them a 5-up ward, you're not really getting...
It depends, right? I'm not always going to do that. Like,
not always,
I'll do that
but...
if I want to get into combat or something. But otherwise, I'm just casting Mystic Shield and like maybe like an Arcane Bolt.
Yeah, and that's not great. I'd rather bring a wizard that has some kind of signature spell or some purpose besides just being a wizard, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like that's like the more we go into AOS, that has become rare since the retirement of the Battlemage. Like I don't know of many heroes that can support that kind of design. Maybe the Sorceress is your best bet because she actually has like I want to say 18-inch spell of -1 to hit rolls or something.
Well, it has to also... In armies that don't have wizards, I can see a stronger argument for it. But if you look at every army, they usually have a wizard that's very cheap. Like even Stormcast, we have a Knight Arcanum if we just want a 100-point wizard. Having the Stormcast keyword is nice. You can learn a good spell. You can use holy commands. You can do things. It's tough. I can certainly see it in other armies, right? Like you mentioned Fire Slayers. I could see it there. There's just a lot I don't like about this War Scroll. So I don't like it from a Stormcast perspective, that's for sure. I wish you didn't have to teleport. That would be...
just choose to do it, yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like Black Talon. She can't teleport if she wants to. Like, she rolls a 1 and she just dies. These guys have the opposite problem. They want to stay in combat. They roll a 1 and they just teleport away. All right, Vanari Dawnriders. I'm going to make a very good case for these guys. These are the new Drakespawn Knight. They are super fast, 14-inch move, super wide screen when you turn them sideways. Like most screens in the game, they're 10 wounds on a 4-up save. So if you just look at them as a 14-inch, super fast, wide screen, like that's great. That's already worth 120 points, right? But they got more. So if you position them properly, like you don't go for the wide screen, you go for a Shining Company instead, they can be -1 hit, which is cool. If you have like a choke point in terrain or something, you can get some additional value out of them. While there's at least 3 models in the unit, the leader becomes a wizard, which means he can cast and he can unbind. The spell you want to cast, obviously, is Mystic Shield. It's the best spell in the game. Or their Mortal Wound thing, which, okay, whatever. It's not a big deal. But if you look at it as a 14-inch move, Mystic Shield casting, unbinding screen for 120 points, it's really starting to look really good. They can also sometimes do okay damage, especially if you fight things with 1 wound. So they can suddenly become a decent attacker if you're fighting skeletons or zombies or crypt ghouls or things like that. Not something I would ever consider when I'm evaluating how useful the unit is. Their damage is really secondary. It's very far out of my mind. It's just the fact that they're a super wide screen that's super fast and can cast and unbind. And all of that is awesome for 120 points. So I think these guys are a B tier. They seem much better than a lot of other allies that we could bring.
I just wish they did better damage. It's wild how low damage LRL is if you're not taking, unless you consider like the Sentinel spam of 2 years ago when they were on 40, 150 points.
Yeah, the max damage of Lumineth is a problem, right? They've got high accuracy.
This used to be 140, and I wish they had damage to support that 140 point position rather than them just becoming like a cheap, I'll just die for you, whatever.
Yeah, and they're 2 wounds apiece. Like cavalry, that's 2 wounds is really weird in this game to me. Feels like there should be 3
Cavaliers
wounds.
And now this, yeah, it's weird. Yeah, it is weird.
The Lumineth Ballista, it is comparable to the Stormcast Ballista, but it's also comparable to like half a unit of long strikes at the current price point. It's 120 points compared to like roughly 240 of long strikes, right? Huge threat range, 30-inch range, 6-inch move, which means a 36-inch threat range. The shooting is decent. It averages about 6 damage per model on 2s, 3s, Rend 2, and that goes to always 9 max damage against monsters because the D3 turns into 3. What's nice about this is that it always hits on 2s, which means it doesn't need all-out attack. Unlike a lot of other artillery in the game, you need some kind of hit bonus. This thing doesn't. It's there. You don't have to spend command points on it, which is cool. It's also got some additional utility. Once per battle, enemies hit by this unit are -1 hit. So that's really good if you're about to charge in with something. Pretty much useless in Lumineth, where they are already -1 hit. But But in Stormcast or other armies, that's actually pretty cool. You can be -1 hit when you're being aggressive. You can hit something that's about to riposte into you as you charge in and fight it. Pretty cool. You can bring 2 of these guys for 240. Yeah, that's about the extent of the goodness of this unit. I think just use long strikes instead. They're better.
I could see you slotting this in to fill out a battle regiment if you had 120 points and you had already figured out your screens or whatever. Just like bring more shooting. I would have seriously considered this if this was like War Machine, but it's not.
Yeah, that's a weird thing, right? It's not an Order War Machine.
Yeah, it's not an Order War Machine. And the new lookouts are also like there was like some people who were considering this in the Lumineth list. Now that they sort of Sentinels went up and they nerfed out Helon. But then right after that, they introduced Lookout Sir, and like this thing was actually pretty good at sniping heroes because like Paul said, it hits on 2s, so it'll go to 3s against heroes, and it's like cool. I could snipe the occasional foot hero with 2 of these. And that was good value for 2 ballistas, but yeah, after that, I don't know if I would take this.
I think there's still room to take a pair of them because they buff each other's range. If you're playing a very specific style of Lumineth, maybe. Their damage output is just so swingy. Right, max 9 damage for 120 points is not good. But then again, what does good damage in Lumineth? Nothing really. So you have to bring a lot of them for them to be good. But the problem is once you bring that many, you just run out of bodies and stuff to contest objectives. So it's tough. It's a tough unit to slot properly.
I could see it in like a more static list, maybe like a Stormkeep list where like you can't take long strike levels of shooting because they need a lot more positioning. This thing has like, in a sense, like for ground pounders, it has like a decent range. 36 is actually pretty good, pretty nice. They're fairly independent. They don't need to be near heroes or anything. So I could see it in like a Stormkeep list maybe, but yeah, nah.
Yeah, we just have better shooting options available.
If this went maybe below the Ballista, if it went to 100, maybe.
It is below our Ballista. The Ballista is 130.
The Ballista, oh my god. No. I don't know why I thought the Ballista was 120.
Yep.
A crew boy price of like 90-point Ballista.
Oh yeah, let's do that. I'd be down with that. All right, let's talk about the Alarith Spirit of the Mountain. And I think it's okay. I think it might be playable. So it is a 340-point monster totem, so it can always issue commands to itself despite not being a hero. It's durable. 14 wounds on a 3-up save, but it always reduces rend by 1. So it's effectively a 2+ save because everything in the game is either mortal wounds or has some amount of rend. Like everything that matters, there's almost no rend 0 attacks left in the game. So it's basically a 2+ save with 14 wounds. And it has a cannon in its face because it shoots 25 inches. It's got a d6 shot on 3s, 2s, rend 2. Okay, cool. Cannon, tough. Good melee damage here, right? 20 damage on 3s, 2s, rend 2. That's a good profile. That's like 2/3 of a Grand Hammer unit. And then a couple other stompy hits. And then if you didn't charge, it actually hits like a unit of Grand Hammers, approximately, right? So that's cool. It also has this thing where you can pick an enemy unit in every phase and give it -1 hit. Well, shooting and combat phases, so it doesn't work on out of phase stuff. But if an enemy charges into you, bam, -1 hit. No dice roll, just happens. -1 hit. And stack that with its high defenses, and that's okay. That's starting to look pretty good. And it fills a behemoth slot in a battle regiment. So it's not taking up any troop slots, which is cool. There's things going on with this War Scroll that I like. The problem is it's 340 points, which is the exact same cost as 2 Storm Drakes. And I don't think Storm Drakes are frankly worth their cost anymore. It's super slow, only moves 6 inches. And Lookout Sir prevents it from shooting heroes with that D6 shot, which that probably would have been the best thing to shoot with it. It's not spectacular. I wrote C tier and I'm honestly regretting it. I think it's probably D tier. I think it's too expensive to be used as an ally. But it's just so interesting. It's got a lot of cool stuff going on. Let's talk about Sevireth, who has actually shown some good results in Stormcast lists. I think I was ignoring him because he was so expensive, but now that he's dropped down to 270, he is starting to seem more reasonable. So let's talk about why exactly. So first thing you notice on his War Scroll is he has a 24-inch flying move. That's not a typo. It is a 24-inch move. He just moves 12 inches forward and 12 inches back, and it's awesome. He's also got an 18-inch range shooting attack, which with his 24-inch move, it's very easy for him to get within range of any support hero in the game and just snipe him out within Lookout Sir range. 4d3 on 3s, 2s, Ren 2. Awesome. Good profile for that sort of thing. He's also got some melee attacks that they're not good, but they're not bad. It's something like 3d3 damage on some varying accuracy. But his War Scroll is just packed with utility. He can smash to rubble, so if you don't have a monster in your list, you can just bring this guy and he can smash the Git's Lair, he can smash the Fireslayer's Pizza Oven, he can smash all of that nasty terrain that everybody's using. After shooting, he can move 12 inches in your shooting phase, which is awesome. So you can move him up to within 18 inches, shoot something, and then move back 12 inches, and now you're 30 inches away from whatever you just shot at. So it's like just free damage, right? It's like using long strikes, except way more mobile. And that works really well because anytime he moves, including in the shooting phase, on a 3+, you can deal D3 mortal wounds to one enemy that you passed over. So you can move forward, pass over D3 mortal wounds, shoot it, pass over D3 mortal wounds, charge in, deal another mortal wound, and then hit stuff with your okay melee attacks. Like, none of this is super high damage, but it's lots and lots of little pings going at the enemy that can finish stuff off. And if you have the precision damage of Stormcast, where you can add supporting fire from things like long strikes, or if you have just super high volume damage, which is something Lumineth really lack, if you have Fulminators or Dracolines or Tempestors or Judicators, you can deal with the things that he wouldn't be able to deal with, things like Gargants. So Sevireth is certainly an interesting unit to use. Super high skill cap, because one of the most important things with him is he can pile away from enemies. Unlike every other unit in the game where you make a pile-in move, you have to move at least as close as you started to the enemy. He can just move in any direction. So it's like, okay, I'm just going to move out of combat. See ya. Yep. And if you charge, that's a 6-inch pile-in. So he can shoot, pass over mortal wounds, charge in, do the mortal wounds, and then just pile out of combat 6 inches away and take an objective somewhere, or get in cover, or something. You know, I don't like. He's not an aggressive piece all the time, but when you need him to be aggressive, suddenly he just goes in and kills something. He's a great assassin for that purpose. So he's like, there's a lot of utility here, and I think skilled generals can get a lot out of him. So I'm going to give him the B tier, despite him being super fragile and he's unique, so he can't take enhancements. It's still a good piece.
I haven't used him, but
okay.
I think he looks good on paper. Like, honestly, like, I think the more you dive into his War Scroll, and with his point cuts, like you said, I think there's an argument for him now.
The Treelord Ancient. So yeah, his main things is he's a monster. 14 wounds, 3 up save, 9 bravery, so pretty durable. Sorry. Good amount of heroic recovery, good potential on Finest Hour. It is a bit slow, does not move very fast. I think it has like 5-inch move, but it has a shooting attack and it has a good melee profile, and can set up an Awakened Wildwood once per game on the battlefield. It is a wizard, so it gets you an Unbuy and gets you like a Mystic Shield. Its main purpose, though, is it is a great defensive anvil because it can give something. It has a monstrous rampage to give an enemy unit within 3 inches strike last on a 3-up, which you can fail. I have failed my share of 3-up translocations, so I can imagine you failing this. But even then, it is a fairly difficult monster to kill. It's not trivial to try to kill this thing. But you know, and I would consider this in a more static list where I was trying to protect blocks of Redeemers or Retributors. But 330 points is like a really high ask, and there is a neat little combo where you can try to set up the woods and try to awaken the woods and do some mortal wounds. But you can't do that in the same turn, you know, so that combo doesn't really work out. So unfortunately, like, this one's a bit of a pass for me.
And you know what's also unfortunate? You know what's 10 points more? Bug Boy.
What? The Durthu?
Yeah.
Oh no, yeah, Belthanos. Yeah. Yeah, just Jesus. Like, Belthanos is. I mean, we're gonna talk about Belthanos because, good lord, how is that thing? Yeah, but this thing is not, in my opinion, it's not worth it.
You could honestly just take a Storm Coven for 275 and just give your hammer unit strike first. It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, but also, like, this thing has got a slightly, like, I think it's like a non-hero cousin called a Treelord. And Paul, I don't know if it's on this list.
Oh yeah, he's right here. It's
There we go.
basically the same thing.
Basically, you just lose the wizard part of it. You go to 230 points, you lose the hero, so you can't heroic recovery, which is sad, but in exchange, you get not only that 3-up fight last rampage, but you get a melee attack that I believe stops pylons if it hits you.
Yes, it does. Yep.
So
It just has to hit. Just hit.
Yeah, it doesn't
move.
even have to. No hit rolls of 6, no damage, nothing, none of that Vigilar crap going on over here. It's just you have like 10 attacks. I believe it's the vines on his hand, and if they hit you, you can't pile in, which is great for protecting those like blocks of infantry, like we talked about. And this is actually so good. Armies like Daughters of Khaine, who have no durability to things trying to strike them in melee, are using this now as an anvil piece.
Yeah, this guy's a lot more reasonable. I do like the utility of creating woods because it blocks line of sight, but there's so many armies that just don't care about line of sight because they're just melee.
Like the main army that you would care about that against is Caradron Overlords, and they will shoot you from the boat, so it doesn't even matter.
Yeah. So Treelord without the Ancient tag is a reasonable proposition. Stormcast probably need it less than other armies, especially now that we have Stormcoven. Like you said, David, Stormcoven are basically doing this for us. But it's not unreasonable. I love being able to not stop pylons and fight last together on the same model. It's a really good thing to have.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know if this is an our army thing, but it's in general. I could see this in like a Stormkeep list.
Yeah,
I could see that.
230 points, same 10 points less than 3 Dracolines, so it's like in that weird range of 200, 240 that we like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unlike that unit though, it's super slow. It's so slow.
The good news is you're almost always running it, and you're not worried about charging with it. It is purely a defensive piece. If it gets to move 5 and charge something, that's a bonus, honestly. In my opinion.
Let's talk about Tree-Revenants. What is there to say? They're 110 points. They're battle line for any battle tactics that matter, but every single turn they can teleport anywhere on the battlefield. It's an automatic translocate all the time, forever.
If they hadn't reduced Vanguard Hunters to 100, I'd be taking this every time.
Yep. Just use Vanguard Hunters. It's cool that these can be anywhere, but most battle plans have objectives that are wholly within 6 inches of the table edge, and some, at least one, right? Vanguard Hunters are also just scoring surround and destroy all the time, which is the main use of teleports right now. So, in another season,
there's quite a few objectives in this season on the board edge.
There are, yeah.
At least 4 of the major battle planes and GTs have board edge objectives. So,
yep. And in another season, Tree-Revenants would be good. Right now, just use Vanguard Hunters instead.
I mean, they basically were until Vanguard Hunters came down to 100.
Yeah.
These do have a smaller footprint for what that's worth, but usually doesn't matter because you're just trying to get on a table edge. All right, let's talk about Big Bug Belthanos. He has a ridiculously stacked War Scroll for his cost of 360 points. Yeah, for 360 points. Let's break it down. He's very fast, 12-inch flying move, but he can always run in charge because he has an aura for Sylvaneth to make them run in charge. So that's dope. He can just run 6 in charge every single turn, so he could just be effectively an 18-inch flying move every turn. He's also durable, 14 wounds on a 3-up save and a 5-up ward built in, and Bravery 9, so he can heroic recovery very easily. Monster, so all the good things that come along with Monster, rampages, counting as 5 on objectives, smashing things to rubble, good stuff. His melee damage is probably a sore spot for me, right? His main attack, the 12 damage spear on 2s, 3s, and 3, that's great. But the horns are so swingy. It's like Alarial levels of swingy, which a lot of times they'll just do 0 because they're on 4s to hit. But it's enough. It's when you play around it, when you play against it, you have to assume it's going to hit, right? So from the attacker's perspective, Belthanos doesn't do that much damage. You can't rely on him to kill much because he's capping out at 28 damage. But from the defender's perspective, you have to assume he's going to do that 28. So he's a good threat.
Well, not just that, but it's more that. So, the thing is, so when you make a piece like, I don't know, the Drakespawn Templar, right? Who's also like, one of the 340, should be 340 or 360, and then, it doesn't have a lot of durability. You can then understand the need for 2s and 3s and 3s and 2. You need that thing to do its job. when this thing is that durable, when it has a 14 wound, 3-up save, 5-up ward, it has a good chance of heroic recovery. It can retreat in charge or run in charge. It can turn any terrain into whatever it wants. Yeah, I just like I think it's like it's fine that maybe like one of his attacks has slightly less reliability because he actually has the staying power to stick there. And I don't think he brackets, does he? Oh no, he does. He does bracket. Never mind. His attacks don't bracket. It's his 2 wound, I think, brackets.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Like it's I'm honestly like I'm surprised you rated it B. I would rate it A. He's just like he's such a good piece, man. Like
Well,
Really.
it's unbelievable.
he's a super fast piece in a Stormcast army. He's fast and durable, right? And the thing is, Stormcast can do better damage for these points and have better defenses for these points because we're talking, reinforced hammers here, 14 wounds. We could do a lot more than that. 3-up save, that's common for Stormcast. 5-up ward is nice, but it's only adding about 7 wounds on average, so 21 wounds effectively. We can just do better, right? So he's good. I think A tier might be a bit of a stretch. I think Zenestra's A tier just because she does so much. She's so impactful and fits into our game plans. Belthanos is impactful, but he doesn't, aside from his speed, he's not adding anything to a list that we wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. And his speed is very good. I don't want to mince words, 18-inch run in charge and then retreat in charge every turn. That's all of that is great. He also transforms terrain into mystical, which is the best type of terrain. You could run Stormkeep and have Zenestra with mystical and Belthanos. that's a possibility.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's great. This is the right point cost. Frankly, maybe a little too cheap. In Sylvaneth armies, he might be a little too good for 360, but we'll see about that because we'll see where he lands. I'm willing to roll the dice and see what happens.
I will say in Sylvaneth, it's weird. It's one of those cases where when we talked about Pontifex Zenestra, we said that in a City of Sigmar army, her cost is fine. It's in every other order army, she's a problem, and I think that's the same with Belthanos. I think he's completely fine in a Sylvaneth army. I think 360 for them feels fine. I think honestly the Treelord Ancient may be a little too overcosted in that army, but it's just that if Daughters of Khaine and Stormcast and Idenith can just take this guy, he's just straight up better than every other monster they have at that point range usually.
I don't know. Have you seen the Kharibdyss?
I can see Daughters of Khaine taking him though. I will say this.
I can. Yeah.
He's like a half a Marathi basically.
Well, you know what the solution to all these problems is? A general rule that you can't use unique units as allies. That'll fix everything.
Yeah, they always seem to be problematic, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Let's look at Seraphon, my second army now officially. Slann Starmaster. He is a 3-spell Wizard Locust, which is awesome. There's not a lot of 3-cast wizards in the game. He can also unbind and dispel anywhere on the battlefield. So no matter where you deploy, you can deny magical dominance, which is huge because I think most armies in the game are trying to score that battle tactic right now. That's one of turn 1 or turn 5. So they're trying to score it, and he's always +1 to cast, unbind, and dispel. So not only is he unbinding everywhere, he's doing it fairly reliably. You just can't do magical dominance while there's a Slann on the battlefield. He's 9 wounds, so he gets to benefit from Lookout Sir, and even though he is riding a flying chair, it doesn't count as a mount. It's just a chair. Sorry, OBR. Getting mogged over here. He generates command points.
The chair's not living, that's the problem.
Yeah, the chair can't kick you.
A living chair. Yeah.
He generates command points. 2 command points on a 4-up. Cool. He's got pretty bad spells baseline. His first one is actually good. Gives all friendly wizards everywhere on the battlefield +1 to cast this turn. So that's pretty cool, but it requires bringing other wizards. You need stuff like Dracolines, you need Arcanums and Incantors, things like that. His other spell just gives him a ward against mortals. Okay. And that's the end of his spells. Because he's an ally, he can't learn any, so all he's casting is Mystic Shield, Celestial Equilibrium, and whatever endless spell you bring for him. And that's kind of hard to justify when he's already 290 points. And that's all he does, right? The casting and the command points... And then you have to pay at least 40 points, let's say, to get a spell on top of that. And he's so fragile, you want him in the back. So he's not going to be an upfront caster. There's not a lot of good long range endless spells for him. So it's rough to find room. I miss the days where he was cheap and he was casting Everblaze Comet. Those were the days.
Or even just Comet's Call. He was just a Comet's Call and Mystic Shield deployer every turn. Yeah, with that being gone, I don't see a use for taking him.
Yeah, I put him as C. I'm probably gonna knock him down to D. He's just
he's probably. I would say he's closer to D.
The denying magical dominance is just so good. Like that's such a useful thing to have. C, yeah, okay. He's just scraping by with C. Talking about a much better wizard. There's not a lot of text on this page, but there doesn't need to be, because the Skink Starseer, what matters? 2-spell wizard for 150 points. And his signature spell, very good. Shuts off wards from an enemy within 12 inches. Awesome. That's all you need.
Been on the Starseer. I think it's really good, 150 points. Yeah. I've been really high on the Starseer.
Sure.
I think he's such good value for 150 points. I mean, you get and I think pretty much he's a 2-spell wizard as an ally. That those 2 spells also it matters. You want to be casting 2 spells every turn, right? You want to be casting Mystic Shield, and you want to be casting a ward if you're within the ward turn off if you're within range. And I think that's that's the opposite. We just talked about the Slann, but yeah, I think he's just really, really good for 150 points. I think if you're running a list, I've been experimenting with Kharibdyss. I think we could start considering him really for 150 points. I think Battle Scroll depending, because obviously the Stormcast, our Achilles heel is always scraping for points. But he is not bad for 150 points. You get a lot of value out of 150.
Now, would you guys ever consider using an Astrolith Bearer for 140 points, who is going to be an extra hero for Warlord Battalion? He's also going to give this guy +1 to cast and +6-inch range to casting. And that's all of his spells, including any endless spells you bring for him. So you can have the Seraphon-style casting ranges in a Stormcast army, and you get 2 heroes and 2 spells out of it. Both of the spells are being +1 to cast. So I think that's not a terrible value proposition for the same cost as a Slann. I think that's better than a Slann. But is that 290 points worth it?
Nah, not in our army.
No, our hammers and stuff are just way too expensive. To combo with that, it makes perfect sense, Seraphon, but I think it's hard to justify in Stormcast.
Yeah, the Astrolith seems like you got to buff more than one wizard.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about the Skink Oracle and Troglodyte, who might be like a Torlon tier overpriced monster that doesn't do enough for his points. But oh man, is that signature spell good. Let's talk about that first, right? Primordial Mire casts on a 7, range 12. Enemies within 3 inches of an objective or a terrain feature cannot run and have half charge rolls. This lasts until your next hero phase on the units that were in range at the time that you cast it. So there's a terrain feature and your opponent has a bunch of melee units near it. Cool. Until your next turn, they can't run and they basically can't charge you, because half charge rolls are brutally bad in this game. Because what happens is, if an opponent moves to within 7 inches, they can't charge, because they have to roll a 12 to charge. Right? You'd have to roll a 14 to charge because it's half down to 7. So they have to move within 6 inches, at least. And when they do that, you have the option to redeploy. And when you redeploy, you're just canceling their charge. Even in the best case scenario, they move up to just more than 3 inches away from you. If you redeploy and if you roll a 4, they can't charge. If you roll a 3, they need a 12 to charge. It's so brutal how this just stops enemies from charging. It's so crazy. It's way stronger than something that halves movement, like the Navigator that we talked about from Caradron. And the fact that it works on every enemy unit within 3 inches of either an objective or terrain, crazy strong. How this is one of the strongest spells in the game. Just the sheer control that you get out of it. Unfortunately, it's tied to a 270 point, fairly fragile hero monster that doesn't do any good damage, only casts 1 spell, doesn't have any bonuses to cast. 270 is kind of the killer here. Nothing else is really good about the Troglodyte. Oh, I guess he does have a -1 hit aura. Enemies within 9 inches have -1 hit. He stops Inspiring Presence if he's in melee, but you don't want him in melee. The -1 hit thing is cool, but 270 is just not. He needs to be 220, 230 to be worth considering. Maybe even cheaper, honestly. But man, is that spell strong. I love it. When you have this guy in a Seraphon army and an Astrolith Bearer to make this an 18-inch range spell, and you can teleport the Troglodyte forward, and it was so fun to do that before Primal Dice became a thing and just stop that from being fun.
Guess we'll see a reemergence of them in next battle pack.
Well, that'll be next edition, hopefully. So we'll see. Yeah. Whole new ball game. Skinks. They're 90 points. There's 10 models. Yep. C tier. You can roll 2 dice when they run or use redeploy, and I really like that, because when you stack that on top of their 8-inch move, that means you have a pretty fast screen that can reliably get to objectives and do some pretty cool stuff with redeploying. Sometimes you just need more bodies in a list. Sometimes you want a screen that's cheaper than 100 points, that is fast enough. Like, I guess the other cheap 90-point screen would be like Arcanaut Company, which are just too slow to matter. But Skinks are fast. They're fragile, but they're fast. And that's enough to get them some play, maybe sometimes in Stormcast. Like, it was a pretty common occurrence in 2nd edition to bring Skink screens in Stormcast armies. Like, that wasn't rare by any means. People would just bring 2 squads of these guys just to have the screen spread wide across the table.
Because they were so cheap. It was just like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, what did they go down to? 60 points?
Why do I want my
point?
expensive unit to get hit?
They were 70, I think, at one point.
They were 70, yeah. Still.
They could be 70 again. They got so much worse in this edition. Hunters of Huanchi. So, these guys are dope. And I'll explain to you why. It has nothing to do with their movement or their shooting or their damage. What makes these guys good is that they can't be seen if they're more than 12 inches from enemies, or if they're in cover. So, like, straight up, if they're in cover, you just can't see them. Which means the only reliable way to deal with them, the most common way to deal with them, I should say, is to melee them. You have to get into melee in order to kill these guys. So no shooting screens, no killing screens with spells. They just can't be seen until you dedicate melee combat. And that is really, really cool for 80 points, especially because these guys go into reserve. So your first deployment could just be a reserve deployment. Your opponent drops a battle regiment. You have all the information you need. You've committed nothing. And then you drop these guys into place somewhere. They have a very small footprint. They can easily fit into very, very tight little corners, and they can go back into reserve and then come back out a following turn. It's like the worst teleport in the game. But yeah, all of this utility for 80 points. And that is pretty cool, honestly. It's enough to get them a C tier.
Not the worst screen in the world, too, because it's 5 models. It's like same thing like having 5 Liberators. You could create a choke point with them that can be shot. So they have to hit that screen. And if they hit that screen for 80 points, well, they did their job.
Yeah. Screens that can't be shot are very, very good. It's like the Wildercorps Hunters, but 60 points cheaper. Not exciting, but tactically very useful. The Spawn of Chotek. So we were really hot on these guys when we first saw them in the book. We even thought about allying them as Stormcast because they've got a lot of cool stuff going for them. So they've got a shooting attack. They can either have like a flamethrower type attack that gets 1 shot per model in range, up to 10, and that's accurate. That's on 2s, 3s, Rend 2. Doesn't need all out attack, which is really cool. The other shot, if there's nothing within their 17-inch threat range, the other shot is a 24-inch single D6 shot on 4s to hit, 2s to wound, Rend 2. And that really sucks. Single shot that has to hit on a 4 and then does D6 damage. That really sucks. However, if an enemy actually takes wounds from this, they don't save it, it doesn't, it hits, it wounds, they don't save it, and they don't ward it, you get +1 rend against that target until the end of the turn. And that is a crazy high damage spike. Because when you shoot with this and then you shoot with Tempesters, you feel like a tactical genius. But yeah, there's a lot wrong with the Source Scroll. So first off, it's 8 wounds and a 4-up save. It's super slow. 5-inch move means only a 17-inch threat range for the main attack, which is the one you want to be doing. It is an artillery, so you'll have at least 1 drop in your list for each spawn of Chotek in your army. So if you're trying to go for low drops, it's not going to fit into that properly. The single shot really is just unreliable. Only 1 unit per army can get all-out attack. And in a Stormcast army, it's not going to be the spawn of Chotek. It's going to be the Tempesters, or even Crossbow Judicators, or something else. Because this guy can't be reinforced, it really limits the power of buffing them, so it makes all-out attack an even worse value proposition. Although it does have okay melee damage, trying to fight with more than one of them is like, well, they're just going to die because they're 8 wounds. Yeah. And then another thing that I found through a lot of playtesting that really annoyed me was the best thing about these guys is the flamethrower shot, which scales based off the enemy unit size. But if you kill the enemy models, your next one shoots less attacks. So it's like almost impossible to actually finish anything off with Spawn of Chotek. You need to add some other damage at the end, otherwise they'll just Inspiring Presence. Because let's say they have 10 models, you shoot 10 attacks, you don't do 10 damage because there's some failures, some saves, and things like that. The next one comes in and says, okay, let's do 5 attacks. Well, again, same thing. Some of those are going to fail, some of those are not going to be saved. You're probably not going to finish anything off. So you need to commit some other damage to finish it off, or have some way to shut off Inspiring Presence. Otherwise, they're just going to inspire and rally. So yeah, it seems good on paper, but when you put it on the table, it really does start to fall apart. I think this could honestly go down to 100 points in Seraphon armies and still just be okay.
I could see running.
Yeah, I was thinking
pseudo artillery like slash Geminids piece.
I'd rather have Geminids. I think the Geminids are more reliable.
I think for 100, there could be an argument for it, but yeah, at 120, it's like, why?
Paying for the old Salamander sins.
There was almost no other unit as sinful as the second edition Salamanders. Yep. That was so ridiculous.
I think the only reason it didn't catch on more was nobody wanted to buy those resin models.
Yeah, pretty much. Who was it? Was it Rerolling Ones? Their review was a guy opens the book, looks at the Salamander, goes to the Games Workshop store, add to cart. Like,
yeah, and they have the exact same profile in melee and shooting, I think.
Yep, they were scary good, and they were so undercosted, it was crazy. But yeah, they're paying for it now, and that's a shame because the new models are gorgeous, absolutely phenomenal, and yeah, it's a shame. Seraphon could just have better shooting in general, I think. Speaking of which, let's talk about the Stegodon. So it is a 260-point monster, 8-inch move, not particularly durable, right? 14 wounds on a 4-up save. However, it does get to add +1 to save rolls against an enemy unit with less than 6 models every combat phase, so that's something. It can either have a flamethrower that just does mortal wounds to hordes, or it can have a great bow that fires 3 shots at 3 damage apiece. And that's not efficient, right? 9 damage for 260 points is not good. The flamethrower is kind of hard to get in range when you only move 8 inches and you don't have reserves or teleporting like Seraphon armies do. The melee damage is just okay. It's max 22 damage and it's all on 3s, rend 1. Charge mortal wounds, each enemy unit on a 2-up D3 mortals. It's a monster, so it can stomp, it can roar. Unlike most monsters, this counts as 10 on objectives, which is actually probably the best thing about it. So why is it B tier, even though I've kind of just said nothing about it is good? I think it's B tier because it does everything, right? It's like a Tempester in that sense. It does a little bit of everything, and what puts it over the edge is the fact that it counts as 10 models on an objective. All the time, even when it's bracketed. Until this thing is removed from the battlefield, it is always counting as 10 models on an objective. So even though it's not an efficient use of 260 points, the fact that it does a little bit of everything, it works in every phase, shooting, charging, combat phase, it hits in all of those. It's a monster, so it affects your other units, and it just has that extra utility of counting as more models. I think it's enough to be a B tier. It certainly feels better than a C tier, I'll say that. The fact that it fits in a battle regiment as a behemoth, that's also kind of nice. So I think I've made a decent case for this. What do you guys think?
Yeah, not bad. I mean, for 260, like, he probably could be 240 and be okay. But yeah, 260 is not a bad price tag. Like you said, it's a really good Swiss Army knife. I think as Stormcast players, we like Swiss Army armies. Like I think that's just how most of our minds work.
Yeah,
and he kind of slots into that.
I think there's so much that this War Scroll does that we'd rather use Tempesters. But it's got that extra utility with the charge mortals, the roar, and counting as 10 that it's worth considering. I hope Stegodons get cheaper, because I would love for them to be cheaper. I want Stegodon spam to be a thing again in Seraphon. All right, let's talk about Gotrek, however you pronounce this. Yeah, he's a menace. He is just a super high impact piece. He is not efficient at all, but he is so high impact. And let's talk about why. So he's durable, very durable. I think he's almost the most durable single model in the game. 8 wounds on a 4-up save with a 3-up ward. Okay, that's pretty good. But then he reduces all damage taken to 1. So every damage 2 attack, every damage 6 attack, all of it gets taken down to 1. If you have an ability that does 10 mortal wounds, that actually just did 1 mortal wound instead. So it takes 24 packets of 1 damage to destroy him on average. And you have to generally do that in a single turn, because he's a hero. He's just going to use heroic recovery over and over and over until you manage to kill him in a single turn. And for a lot of armies, that's hard to do. Not a lot of armies have a lot of units that can just have super high volume fire. Stormcast are one of the armies that can do it pretty well, and I'm pretty stoked about that. But man, Gotrek can be a real menace if you're playing the wrong army at the wrong time. His melee damage is also good. 18 max damage on the surface, and it's on 3's Rend 2 with full rerolls to hit and wound, which is a super rare thing in 3rd edition to reroll hits and wounds. But every hit roll of 6 causes d6 mortal wounds in addition to his normal damage. So he can just spike out of control. Crazy high spike potential in this guy. And then at the end of the combat phase, if he's still in combat, he can just fight again. Like, he just fights twice. It's pretty cool. Downsides, he's super slow. Like, unbelievably slow. 4-inch move. There's no way to teleport him or give him reserves. I don't think Stormcast have any way to boost his speed. Some armies do, like Fyreslayers do, right?
Fyreslayers do?
Yeah, one of the runes gives +2 move to Duardin, I think.
It does. It's the Fyreslayers. You have to take a command trait, I think, for that.
Yeah, it's not worth it generally, but you can.
Yeah.
Any kind of anti-ward ability, things like OBR's -1 wards, Khorne's artifact that shuts off wards, all of these things really, really, really suck for Gotrek to deal with. So thankfully, those things are kind of keeping him suppressed in the meta. And frankly, for 480 points, Stormcast can do a lot better. We have better damage. We have better anvils. He's a fun piece. You're going to see him in a lot of other armies, but not necessarily in Stormcast. I think we can just do better.
He becomes really good when the objectives get concentrated in the center. Like, we had that short period of time when Galatian Veterans, I think, was in the meta.
Yep.
Where
I was about to say that, like, last season, he was a lot seen more because everything was, like, fight in the middle. And that's where he lives. That's where he wants to live.
Yeah, so it's like, if you have Realmstone Cache, hell yeah, just, like, run that guy up there. It's like, cool, I have that objective now.
Yeah. As soon as you play, like, Power Flux with Gotrek in your list, you'll be like, oh god, why did I bring him?
Yeah.
It's the worst model to have.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the objectives that I see in plans these days have 4 to 6 objectives, so it's like, he's not good in those at all.
Yeah, he's struggling this season. Despite all of that, I think, I said there's better choices for Stormcast, but I'm still going to give him a C tier because he's a model like Celestant Prime that as soon as you count him out, somebody will surprise you with just that unique combination of things. He's super high impact. Even if he's not efficient, he will just come out of nowhere and win games. In the right situations, people make mistakes too. It's not nobody plays flawlessly. So, yeah. Never count him out. C tier. Let's talk about the Kronspine one last time. No more after this. Never again.
Just end it. It's like, it's full. They nerfed it. They can't use Rupture or whatever. A lot of people are taking Shaman. Rupture hurts. Boom, done.
I feel like we should talk about it for people who haven't heard us talk about the Kronspine before.
That's fine.
What makes the Kronspine scary? It's a 480 point monster with okay damage, but it's fast, it's flying. Nothing can retreat around it, so as soon as you get in combat with the Kronspine, you're fighting to the death. Either the unit or the Kronspine will be dead by the time that combat's over. But that's really hard to do because the Kronspine doesn't take damage like a normal unit takes damage. They just lose power levels if they take enough damage in a turn. And it's random, so sometimes it just doesn't lose the power levels because you didn't do enough damage. The fact that it just doesn't die, guaranteed one turn it survives, is like one of the worst things they've ever added to the game. Like, everybody hates this mechanic, right? And then the fact that it's attached to a model that will stop you from retreating, so it's like, well, not only are you literally immortal, you're also preventing me from getting away from you. It's such a terrible combination of things. It can also power up. So like, you have to weaken it, you have to reduce its levels, but it can gain levels. Every time it kills a monster, it gains a level, so you better not have monsters in your list that can feed the Kronspine and make it tanky. It can also eat enemy wizard endless spells. So if you cast an endless spell against a Kronspine, you've probably lost the game. However, if the Kronspine goes wild, which means the bonded wizard has been slain, and like we talked about with the Sorceress, you could just guarantee that in a Stormcast army. If the Kronspine is wild, everything on the table is an enemy. So every endless spell counts as a spell cast by an enemy wizard, which means you can cast your own endless spells. The Kronspine walks forward, eats them, and then gains a power level immediately. And once a Kronspine gets to level 3, it's like a completely different game. Like, you better hope your opponent doesn't have Rupture. You're going to have a great time as the Kronspine player. So yeah, that's why people hate the Kronspine. Its unique combination of abilities just make it not fun to play against. Thankfully, like you said, Morgonk, Rupture is a thing that is now killing Kronspines. It is causing them to go extinct. Even before Rupture existed, before we could do that, I think Stormcast just have better options in general. We have better hammers, we have better anvils. It's Rupture that really makes it unplayable in Stormcast now. It's not unplayable, but not worth the cost.
480 points, like you're building. It's like a Karazai. You're building a list around that.
Yeah,
that unit now.
And unlike Karazai, it can't just kill the enemy army by itself.
It used to, but yeah, not anymore. I think ever since because I think the Kronspine was at its worst before Soulblight and OBR came in. And with those armies, it's pretty trivial to get rid of this thing, especially against Soulblight. It's like, cool, you'll be stuck fighting like 40 zombies on a 5 ward for like 2 turns.
Yep. And you'll just mortal wound yourself to death because
zombies. More or less, you'll kill yourself. Yeah.
All right, the last ally on our list. We haven't talked about this guy in a while. Bundo Whalebiter from Sons of Behemoth. He is a Kraken Eater Mega Gargant, and unfortunately, as an ally, he doesn't have the best thing about Mega Gargants, which is counting as like 1 billion models on objectives. That is something you can only get if you play Sons of Behemoth. So why do we even want to talk about him? Well, because the Kraken Eater is the most fun one as an ally, because he has this ability where in your hero phase, if you are within an inch of an objective that you control, you can kick that objective and move it 2d6 inches in whatever direction you want. You just move objectives.
Pretty good, yeah.
So you could do this, for example, in a Stormkeep army. You could kick an objective off the middle line, move it into your enemy territory, and then score a battle tactic by contesting it because it's wholly within enemy territory with the Cities of Sigmar unit. It's so stupid, but it's so fun. He's got, typical Gargant things, 35 wounds, 4-up save. Damage is not great. 2-up D6 mortals after charging to every unit. Enemies can inspire. If you've seen Gargants, you know Gargants. Obviously, Stormcast can do better for the point cost of this guy, but man, is kicking objectives fun. It's just so fun to play with that.
Actually, in my last GT, one of the Gargant players playing Power Flux, the A and B objectives.
Oh, yeah.
He managed to kick both the A's onto the B's and then just park 2 Gargants on that there. I was like, that is the greatest thing in the world I've ever seen.
Yeah, that's pretty fun, actually.
Yeah, so that's why he's worth mentioning, just because there's like neat tricks you can do like that. In terms of damage and defense and bodies on objectives, obviously there's better choices, but he's fun. And that's what we're here to do, is to have fun, right? All right, and that'll wrap it up for this video. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Hopefully this has been an interesting look at different allied units for Stormcast. If you're a Stormcast exclusive player, maybe we've given you some ideas that you could branch out into new armies, bring them in as allies, and then think, maybe I'll expand this into a full army someday. So that's always fun. If you think we missed anything, if there's allies that you would like to talk about, then feel free to leave a comment down below the video. Or jump into our Discord server. We talk about Stormcast and Age of Sigmar all day, every day. We're super hot on Flesh Eater Courts discussion at this particular time. So if you're watching this video on release, you can also look forward to a Battletome review for Flesh Eater Courts coming in the near future. David and I are also going to work on how to play Karazai and our Faction Identities video. You can also consider supporting the gang by becoming a member on YouTube or joining us on patreon.com/thestormkeep. For $5 a month, you get early access to all our videos, and you get access to these slides that we use.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Thanks for all for joining us.
Yeah, see you guys next time.